If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is the scariest, eeriest, and strangest thing you've ever encountered in your life that you still can't explain?
I was taking a trip with my then girlfriend, and we had to cross the Hudson River to get to where we were going. There are only a handful of bridges across, and I know them all from having grown up in the area. On that particular trip we were supposed to take the Bear Mountain Bridge, but I got off at the wrong exit and passed it. We decided it wasn't a big deal. The next bridge, the Newburgh Beacon, was actually closer to where we were going. It would just bring us over a little bit past our destination, but not enough to really matter. So we kept on driving, not really paying specific attention to where we were since it was probably 20 to 30 minutes until we got there. Well, we never crossed the Newburgh Beacon that day. We also never crossed the Bear Mountain. And we certainly didn't drive an extra half an hour to the mid-Hudson or turn around and go back to the tap. When we did take a minute to check where we were and how close the bridge was, we found we were already on the other side of the river. No bridge, we were just already there. So either there's a secret tunnel somewhere under the river, we had our memories erased, or we found some kind of spatial rift somewhere in the Hudson Valley. Went on a bike ride with a friend about a year ago in the summer. The trail we were on went through the woods, crossed a road, and then went through a thin tree line that eventually left you between two fields. They were bean fields, this is important. We stopped for a pee break, and I took a picture of the sunset, and I put my phone back in my pocket. I get on my bike, and my friend is sitting on his bike just staring straight forward, dead silent. He points to a man wearing coveralls with what looked like a straw hat walking toward us on the path. We look at each other and duck right off. Now, there was no way we could have missed him. The nearest house wasn't for about half mile or so. Guy was clearly an older man, as he was about 40-ish yards from us. In closing, there wasn't any farm equipment out, no other trails, and especially nowhere to hide. Where the duck did this guy come from? We haven't been back since. I don't even believe in ghosts. A few stories, actually. So for context, I was living in a rather small village with 300 inhabitants. The next bigger road is not too far away from us, but the road leading through our village is pretty small. The first story, when I was younger, I had a tree house. It was pretty cool, and we actually thought about having electricity and water up there, but we never did that. And one night, I couldn't sleep. I was watching my tree house, and all of a sudden, this thing lit up. We never had any lamps there, so how could this have happened? It went out after a few minutes, and it never happened again. This story happened at the same time I experienced alien nightmares and had the feeling of being watched by something invisible. And the second story is even weirder. So, as I told you, I was living in a small village. The next train station is like 6 kilometers away, and sometimes, when my parents couldn't pick me up, I had to walk. It usually took me 45 minutes, more or less. One night, I was at a friend's place. I took the train to the next station, and from there I had to walk. I remember I took the train at 7 p.m., so I should be home at 8, right? 10 minutes by train, 45 minutes walking. It took 2.5 hours for me to get home, and I can't explain what happened on the way home. I'm still thinking about it today. I and a buddy were driving home late one night from an NBA game. We lived about 45 minutes from the arena downtown. We are driving northbound on the freeway in heavy traffic for about 15 minutes, and the next thing we know, we are several cities north of our hometown, not another car in sight, and only 15 minutes have passed. We look at each other at the same time when we realize we've gone way too far, look down at the clock in the car and realize only 15 minutes have passed. Remember, a drive home should have taken 45 to 60 minutes, and we are at least 30 minutes past our hometown the other way, and we both start losing our damn minds. We turned around and drove back south towards home. Nothing strange happened, and it took the 30 minutes it should have to get home. To this day, everyone we tell about this story tells us we are lying or trying to pull some kind of a joke. Sure, we could have been distracted by the radio or talking too much where you forget what happens, but the time issue. It only took us 15 minutes to get somewhere when it should have taken at least an hour. I truly believe between the last thing we remembered and when we realized where we were, we entered some kind of time warp. Praying someone has had a similar experience who thinks we're not crazy. When I was a child, had to be about 6 to 7 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and, for some reason, started fiddling with the blind to the window that was right above my bed. I did the thing where the blind shoots up to the top of the window accidentally. I saw what I now know to be a jinn. The creature was pure black and had human-like white eyes. I screamed, and it screamed back, not making a single sound. I fell backwards off my bed. At this point my dad came running into the room. "There's a black man outside my window." Dad ran outside with his pistol but found nothing. The next day he installs tinted windows in my room, the kind where you can see out but not in. We were poor growing up, but the intensity of my reaction convinced him that it all really happened, and he took action. Years later, as an adult, I discussed this with Dad. It was then I realized my description led him to believe an African American man was trying to peep in / break in through my window. You know your window was up pretty high, right? Someone would have to be 8 feet tall to look into that window without a ladder. It was then I described to him for the first time what I actually saw. He couldn't believe it. To this day, all windows are entirely covered at nighttime. I do not allow for open windows / blinds past sunlight hours. I always took solace throughout my life thinking, it was just as scared of me as I was of it. So monsters are real, but they feel fear. I can live with that. I described this event to a coworker about a year ago. When describing the "it screamed back at me" bit, she replies, "Oh my God. Like it was mocking you?" I haven't recovered from this. It was mocking me. It didn't scream until a second after I did. It was making fun of how scared I was. I have nothing further to add. I decided to watch Paranormal Activity for the first time with my dad up at our family cabin, in northern Wisconsin, in the middle of winter, and as far in the country as you can get. Not many other people were around, especially in the winter. Anyway, we're big horror movie guys, so we were really excited. It got dark out, and I turned all the lights off except a little night light at the end of the hallway to see the bathroom door. Fast forward about 75% of the way done with the movie, and we take a quick break to grab a drink and go to the bathroom. Walk into my bedroom, and all the lights are on. Overhead light, night light, lamp, and even a flashlight in a closed shelf. I specifically remember turning off all the lights, and the way this cabin is set up, there is no way to not see someone go into my bedroom. My dad never got up before I turned the movie on, so it couldn't be him, and frankly, he was just as terrified as me. Usually I'd chalk it up to some freak coincidence, but 4 different lights that use different sources of power all turn on when I'm 100% positive they were all turned off originally? We ended up turning off the movie and watching the funniest movie we had nearby, Ace Ventura. I am an atheist and have no belief in anything paranormal or anything not really science-based, but this really ducked with me when I was 12, and both my dad and I still have no explanation. I didn't see anything, but I heard strange sounds when I went camping with my dad when I was 12 years old back in 2007. We were sitting around the campfire at night when, out of nowhere, we heard this loud sound. My dad and I couldn't tell what it was. At first we thought it was a jet, but it was a clear night, and we didn't see any strobe lights at all in the sky. It wasn't a car or any large vehicle on the nearby highway, as automobiles do not produce that kind of sound. We couldn't tell if it was coming from the sky or the nearby mountains at this point. It was really loud and kept going on consistently for a long time too, and we just sat there and listened. The sound went away, and it was time to go to sleep, so instead of sleeping in the tent, my dad and I slept in my dad's camper in his truck because I was too scared. Then late at night, I had no idea what time it was, but that sound came back and it woke me up. I stayed awake with my eyes wide open until the sun came up. The sound never came back after that night, and we've gone back to that campsite multiple times over the years and never heard it again. You know, the funny thing is that around 2011 to 2012 people all over the world were hearing loud horn sounds coming from the sky, and those sounds are exactly what I heard at that campsite. I still get chills talking about it. When I was young, my little brother and I would explore the woods and abandoned areas of the English countryside. There was this one abandoned, overgrown farmhouse that we and a few other kids from the town broke into by kicking in the kitchen window, which was the closest window to the ground, as the kitchen was half in the ground. When we got into the kitchen, the table was set and laid, and very old, dry, and shriveled food was still on the plates. To us it seemed like the family. It had been a few days since the storm, but we figured it had been struck by lightning and burned to the ground. Being curious boys, we sifted through the ashes because why not? That is until I uncovered that cabinet, in near perfect condition, with very little burn marks on it and the doll inside, perfectly intact, just staring at the sky. It freaked me to my core, and I've never run away from anything faster in my life. I never went back, and by the next year my dad had been posted elsewhere in the country, and we moved. But I have never shaken the feeling that the lightning didn't start the fire, nor did the family just leave. 14 years ago, we were house and dog sitting for the summer for a friend who'd gone out of the country and didn't want to leave their place empty or put their dog in a kennel for 2 months. One night there was a truly phenomenal thunderstorm. The lightning was so constant that instead of being dark, everything was lit with this eerie flickering blue/white light with occasional purple flashes. The air was rumbling, The thunder was so active. The warm rain fell so thickly that visibility was reduced to the point where you couldn't see the other side of the street, which had transformed into a little river about an inch deep. It was like being on an alien planet. We were mesmerized, and because it was so warm, we went and sat outside on the covered front porch. Suddenly my BF said, "Is someone out there?" and nudged me to look down the street. It looked like the shadowy, indistinct figure of a person weaving around in the middle of the street. As we watched, the person came closer and closer down the street. But we quickly realized there was actually no one there. It was a roughly person-shaped hole in the rain. My BF was gripping my arm tightly by now, and we were frozen watching. You could see the falling rain stopping as if hitting a body, there were sprays flying off in directions rain was not falling, and stompy splashes in the rain flowing down the street just like you'd see if someone was stamping their foot in a puddle. But there was no one there. It was like watching the Invisible Man. It was now right in front of our house, there was a clear rhythm to the movements, and it became clear this figure seemed to be dancing in the rain. We were both terrified and fascinated, but there was this weird feeling of danger too. We were barely breathing, and my BF whispered right in my ear, "It can't notice us." There was a super bright lightning flash just then, one so bright it left us blinking and seeing purple for a moment. The figure stopped dancing and was standing before the house, and we both had this horrible feeling that it was looking at us. Then the movement started up again, slower now. It made its way up the short driveway and onto the lawn in front of the porch, where it slowed to a stop. My BF's grip on my arm was painful at this point, and I could feel him winding up to make a lunge for the door to try and get us inside. Suddenly the dog started barking aggressively and loudly in a way we'd never heard it bark before, and then it started throwing itself at the door. The thing on the lawn jumped backwards and then ran away across the grass, down the drive, and then down the street. As it was running away, we jumped up and ran into the house, locking the door behind us and calming the dog down, who was beside himself and insisted on smelling us all over for some time before his hackles would go down. To this day I have no idea what we could have seen. We've talked about it many times. Every rainstorm, we spend a bit of time looking out of windows. We live about a 15-minute drive from there now. We've never seen anything similar since. 4 years ago, my boyfriend took me on our first date one night after I got out of work. He drove me to a small town on Lake Michigan about 45 minutes away from Grand Rapids, where we lived at the time, and out to a very tall sand dune. He and I packed LED hula hoops and poi, a backpack with sweatshirts and a blanket, and I brought a bottle of white wine. He had a 6-pack of his favorite beer, Founders All Day IPA. We parked at the bottom of the dune in the parking lot at around 11 p.m. It was dark, and the sky was clear, so we could see tons of stars. We trekked up the dune using our phones as flashlights. Once at the top, we laid out a blanket and sat down talking for a while. I remember turning music on my phone, and we were both dancing and spinning our LEDs, and then absolutely nothing. The next thing I knew, I woke up gasping for breath at the top of the dune with him lying next to me. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him I didn't know. "What happened? What time is it?" I asked, but he didn't know. He said he didn't remember lying down, and I know that I wasn't exhausted when we got up there. I know I didn't lie down and fall asleep. I frantically grabbed the bottle of wine, expecting it to be empty, but it wasn't even opened. None of his beers were open either. We checked our phones, and it was almost 5 in the morning. Neither of us had any recollection of what we had done for the last 5 hours. We flew down that giant dune, and when we got to Hisser, we realized we had left the keys at the top of the dune. He told me to stay in the car, which was parked under a light, and he would be right back. I remember sitting in the passenger seat looking into the woods, feeling/knowing something was just outside the light, watching me. He finally came down with the keys, and we started driving home in silence. He turned on music, but I couldn't hear it. I felt paralyzed until I randomly burst into tears, hyperventilating, completely inconsolable. He tried to get me to calm down, but I couldn't. I begged him to pull into a Walmart parking lot, and when he asked me why, I told him I needed to be around other humans and in lights, so he did. We sat in the parking lot for an hour. Neither one of us really had much to say. I think we both knew what happened to us. We're still together, but we haven't talked about it in years. Just typing this out brought tears to my eyes and gave me anxiety. I always like to act like I'm a skeptic. In my life I've had only one experience that truly left me pondering the supernatural. The rake. I used to wake up with sleep paralysis. From ages 12 to 17 it was regular. At age 16, I saw something for the first time. I woke up sharply, feeling a presence, which was new. I was a very anxious kid, so I immediately peered around my limited vision. Standing as upright as possible in the corner of my room was a thin humanoid shape. I closed my eyes out of fear and must have lain there for hours before drifting off. Months later, I woke up again for the first time since then. I peered down past my feet, and the outline of the top of a head stared back at me. Again, I closed my eyes, fearing the end. This morning only brought me release. Not a month after the second time seeing something, I was driving home from work. Now freshly 16 and driving my first car, I felt amazing. I got off the highway and hit a long, 55 miles per hour country road that took me the rest of the way to my town. I flicked on my lights and turned the music up a bit. The road was known to be dangerous because of the deer and its sheer state of disrepair. I was speeding. Suddenly I saw a figure on the side of the road. It was crouching over what appeared to be a bag. I took my foot off the gas and coasted down a bit in speed. As I drew nearer, I saw it wasn't a bag, it was a dead deer. Going 45-ish mile per hour now, I gave the figure one good look as I flew by. Its face was ghoulishly thin with ghastly body proportions. 4 months later, I found myself working at a summer camp located an 8-hour drive north of that town. I had been up there for a few weeks, and high school week finally rolled around. I got to camp instead of work for a week. I got in the zone, got placed in a competitive cabin, and got close to the other boys quickly. Thursday night was campout night. This camp was in Michigan on the edge of the Huron National Forest. We would hike on an access road miles deep into the forest and find a spot to sleep under the stars. I remember passing the 18-mile marker, which is only 5 miles from the camp. The access road started beyond the other side of the camp. This left us about 5 miles due northwest of camp. We played all sorts of games, and soon it was dark. As the 8 of us sat around the campfire with our counselor, a boy straight across the fire from me jerked to attention, looking at something beyond me. I swung around with 2 other people and saw the tail of something vanishing down the path we'd forged through the brush to find our camping spot. He seemed shaken but didn't even mention it. Later, as we're winding down the fire, he suddenly yelps and points through me. As everyone does, I whip around. At the edge of the brush, not even 15 yards from me, were the ghastly humanoid features I'd seen in my room, and leering back was that same ghoulish face I'd observed on the side of the road. It turned and ran back down the path in a disgusting crouched position, using its hands only for every 3rd or 4th stride. It left everyone completely shaken. I'm now almost 21, and I've never seen anything of the sort again. After that final encounter, I didn't experience sleep paralysis again. As the tale of the rake goes, it appears in your sleep first, and every time you see it, it gathers closer to you until it's almost touching. Then you start to see it in real life until it's ready to take you. One year, while I was at university, I was driving south from northern Ontario, near Hearst, on my way to Toronto. If anybody is unfamiliar with the area, northern Ontario is a vast spread of Canadian Shield, rocky landscape, and dense brush. A bunch of relatively small mining towns spread out over, like, a 300 kilometers radius. It's kind of eerie, and Highway 11 is the most depressing stretch of highway I've ever been on. For anybody familiar with it, it's close to midnight, and I'm past the Kirkland Lake cutoff and decide to stop at the next stop/diner/whatever to get a coffee and stretch my legs. I pull off right near Englehart, peel into the Tim Hortons, and go to the bathroom. After I come out, I grab a coffee and a snack and sit down to eat it. About 10 minutes go by, and this old lady sits down at my table. There is nobody else in the shop apart from the ladies behind the counter. At first she didn't say anything, just looked at me, and she could probably tell I was a little freaked out. Finally she just went, "Truss, it's so good to see you. How have you been? How are, Dad's name, and, Mom's name, and has, sister's name, finished up with school?" I started to shake. I was so nervous and asked her how she knew who I was and that I was there. I had never been there before and was a little freaked out. She got up super quietly again, just smiling, told me they've been keeping an eye on me, and then she left, and that was the end of it. I don't know who she was or how she knew me, but midnight in a little bumduck town in northern Ontario in the middle of the night was enough to freak me out for the next little while. I guess this isn't the story about what I saw in the forest that night, but rather what my dog saw. Or if you wish, what saw me. I love to tell creepy stories, but there's one I only tell if someone asks me about it because they've heard from someone else I told it to them. I don't know how well it will translate to text, but here goes. I was out walking my dog in the forest late at night. This is not unusual or freaky, it's something I do a lot and enjoy. It's tranquil, soothing, and just my dog and me. I'm not scared of the dark or the forest, and I have my dog with me. There are no dangerous wild animals where I live and no bigger animals at all. I also do not scare easily. On that cold October day, the stars were clearly visible, and the strong moonlight illuminated my path. I have a light, but I didn't need to use it. As I'm just walking, minding my business, happy and enjoying myself, there is a sensation like someone had cracked an egg filled with ice-cold water on my head. That's the best way I can describe it. The cold runs down from the top of my head, down my whole body to my toes, and I am instantly terrified. I get goosebumps all over, and I just know without any doubt in my mind that I am in mortal danger. At the same time, this feeling rushes over me. My dog, who is walking in front of me, has stiffened and turned towards the forest. His tail goes low, his head and ears go low, and his mane rises like on an upset cat. I have never seen him do this before or since. Instead of his normal startled bark or the way he'd bark at a wild animal, he emits a low growl and stares intently at a space between some of the trees. I look in the same direction as him, and I hear a voice in my head, clear as day, say, "Don't look at it because then it will know you are aware it's there." I've heard my crisis situation voice before, and it's always weird, having your brain speak to you like it's a different entity, but I do not need it to tell me a second time. I turn around and look for the quickest exit. My dog's inner crisis voice has not given him the same message because he is fixed on the spot and refuses to move. I manage to yank him while he is still growling deeply like I've never heard before, and I find a shortcut out of the forest. As soon as I pick up my speed and get my dog going, the wind picks up, and it is warm, and it carries with it a smell of fermented apples and rotten leaves. I hightail it out of there, running like I've never run before, and as soon as we get out of the forest, my lungs basically give up. I have asthma, and running in dry air is not possible. I know that I'm safe out of the forest, though, but before I can get any ideas, the voice in my head once again states, "Keep moving and don't look back." Fighting the instinct to not look back, I manage to drag myself and my poor dog away. When I get home, I lock the door, light every lamp in the house, and I don't turn them off until morning. I don't sleep either. I have no clue if it was just something in my brain that went, "Let's become scared now." And my dog picked up on it, but still to this day it terrifies me. I always get goosebumps when I tell this story, and I have them now just from writing it out. Make of it what you will. I certainly can't explain it. In high school I made my room in our partially finished basement for several years. I'm the oldest of 4 and wanted my own larger space away from my siblings. It was a fairly large house but laid out pretty simply, with a rectangular footprint, 2 stories, plus a basement, and stacked staircases in the middle of the house. Being in the basement, you get used to all the sounds of a house, noises from the house settling or wood creaking with temperature changes, people's footstep patterns, and certainly staircase utilization. You can easily discern direction by the sound. On several occasions late at night I heard someone use the main staircase, coming down from the second floor, and then heard footsteps into the kitchen, directly over my room. I would go up to get a drink and see who was up only to discover nobody around. After the first time it happened, I would also go upstairs to the second floor to see if anyone was awake and wandering, in an attempt to rationalize that maybe I was mistaken and the sound was someone going upstairs. This was also not the case. I would never find anyone awake. Several years later we moved out of the house, job relocation, and I had 3 close friends come over, and we camped in the basement of the completely empty house one last night before the move. My family was at a hotel and all our belongings were in a large moving truck. On 4 occasions that night, we heard footsteps both on the main floor and on the stairs while we were the only people there. Likely, we went upstairs to investigate and or see if someone was playing a trick on us, each time with nothing to see. We ended up bailing out of the house sometime around 2 a.m. to a friend's house. Fast forward about 12 years, and that house comes up at a family gathering, and 2 of my 3 siblings, without any prompting, immediately say they thought that house was haunted and then share similar stories. My sister remembers frequently hearing noises like footsteps while she was the only one home. My brother recounted several instances when he heard footsteps in the hallway and expected my father to be checking on him. However, when he looked up and saw nothing, there were 2 occasions where his door opened, and he yelled for my dad after seeing nobody there. My dad corroborated that story. None of us had ever shared those things with each other. I am a skeptic when it comes to supernatural/paranormal type stuff. I don't entirely disbelieve it, but I'm more inclined to find scientific evidence or reasoning. Still, all these years later, I have no explanation for that stuff. I share a room with my brother, and our bedroom door will randomly open if you don't close it a certain way. We used to get scared as kids when it would randomly open, so now every night we make sure it's closed the right way before we go to bed. One night, my brother and I were watching TV, and eventually we just got too tired, so we didn't bother closing the door the proper way. We eventually just knocked out. Then later that night I randomly wake up. It's dark, and I see a shadowy figure of a man walk across my room. I try screaming and moving, but I can't. It was the first time I had sleep paralysis. I see the figure walk towards the window near the bed my brother was sleeping in and just stare out the window. Eventually I fall back asleep. The next morning I go to work and tell my coworker about the dream I had last night. She reassures me that I just had sleep paralysis, and it's nothing to worry about because she gets it all the time. I'm like, yeah, I was just really tired last night, so it probably was sleep paralysis. When I get home from work, my sister's home. I tell her, yo, I had the craziest dream last night, I think I had sleep paralysis. But before I told her my dream, she said, you had sleep paralysis? No, you didn't, because I think I saw you randomly walk into my room last night and stare out the window. I was tripping out because she told me exactly what I saw before I even told her. I have 4 dogs, so I don't think a stranger or burglar was in the house. Probably one of the weirdest things that happened to me. I live in my childhood home now. There is an unmarked grave on part of the land. We only know it is a grave because my uncle confirmed it by digging there, many years prior to my parents purchasing the property. It's very old, no missing story here. It was common here for some families to lay their family members to rest on their property hundreds of years ago. Anyways, I never knew about the grave as a child, but I used to hear crying at night often. I thought it was my little sister, so I went to her room to check on her when I was about 9. When I got there, she was sound asleep, so I left her room and heard the crying again and turned around, and she was behind me. It didn't really register that she didn't open the door or how she got behind me so quickly, but I asked her what was wrong, and she looked so shocked. Then she was gone. I opened her door again, and she was still sleeping. It wasn't my sister. I told my parents about it in the morning, and my mom cried and didn't want to hear any more about it. Dad said it must have been a dream. When I was older, Dad and I were talking, and I asked him if he remembered the dream I had, and I told him it really didn't feel like a dream, it was so clear. And he told me that he and Mom used to hear a little girl crying for her mommy and saw her several times. Mom was too spooked about it and didn't like to talk about it. He told me about the grave and that he really didn't know anymore, it was just a sad thing and made him question a lot of his beliefs. Since living here as an adult, I haven't seen her around. I like to think she's moved on. But last Halloween my kids carved pumpkins, and we used battery-powered candles instead of real candles, and the candles were removed and placed in the backyard at night. The pumpkins seemed untouched. We live very rural with only 2 neighbors who are very elderly, so not much explanation for that. Does anyone know what could have happened there? I am a person who can only believe in things that he has seen himself and is very skeptical even then, but I swear that this story happened, and I thought if I published it here, maybe someone would know what happened there or have some similar experiences. When I was 14, we lived in this house from the 70s for 2 years. My parents lived downstairs, and I lived upstairs by myself. I had a living room, a kitchen, a room for my rabbits, and my bedroom with a small door that led to a small, windowless room. Like a chamber. The chamber's door was only 1.50 meters high, which forced me to bend down. I always had a bad conscience in the house but put it down by saying that I was generally very anxious as a child. I used the chamber for moving boxes and a few clothes. Because I always had a terrible feeling. I always locked the door of the chamber with a key. We had a dog at the time. An Australian Shepherd who was very fixated on my mother. She only slept with her and followed her everywhere. I have never seen her without the dog. One day when I came home from school, I wanted to go up to my room when suddenly my dog came up alone. I was very confused because she never did that in the years we had her, but I thought maybe she doesn't want my dad right now and will go away when my mom gets home from work. I lay in my bed for hours, but my dog just wouldn't walk away. She didn't leave when my mother came home nor when my mother came upstairs to get our dog because she was going to sleep. She didn't want to leave. Even my parents were very confused because that never happened. Our dog slept with me until morning and only went down when I went to school. The next day she came up again in the evening and stayed with me until the next morning. This happened the same way for about a week. I couldn't explain it. The dog that never left my mother's side didn't even go to her anymore when she called her and wanted to get her. When she slept with me for days, she was very restless one evening and kept barking out the window over my bed. I thought because it was raining that she saw the reflection of herself in it and barked because of it. When I woke up the next day, my dog was lying on my bed as usual. I got up and, as always, looked in my mirror first. I looked at myself and suddenly saw that the chamber that I always locked was open. I immediately ran to the door, closed it, and turned the key again. I was so in shock because I knew I always locked them and would never leave them open. I went to school, and when I came back, my dog never slept with me again. We now live in another house, and it's been 7 years, but my dog has never slept with me again. I'm sorry that it has become so long. I hope that maybe someone who is familiar with such things reads this or has experienced something similar can help me because I still can't explain it to this day. When I was in my teens, my family rented this beautiful house. It was huge. It had 2 stories. Upstairs, it had 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a sunroom, a lounge room, etc. Downstairs it had a second lounge room, a laundry, and behind the stairs on the bottom floor it had a little walkway that led to 2 doors. One door would take you into the garage, the other door led to an old, abandoned darkroom and what appeared to be an abandoned bedroom. It was directly on the dirt, there was no flooring, and there was a smashed up bed. I hated the bottom story of that house. Every time you walked down the stairs, it felt like someone was watching you from the walkway. It felt angry, ominous, and threatening. It was terrifying. I actively avoided going down the stairs, but occasionally you'd be in the lounge room upstairs, and you'd feel the same presence watching you from the top of the staircase. The man that owned the house was in a nursing home with dementia, and his daughter was handling renting the property. Weirdly enough, the old man died one day, and all the weird presences went away too. We discussed it years later, and as it turns out, everyone in the house had similar experiences. I don't know if it was real, but it was scary. My dog's frantic barking woke me up around 3 a.m. I went to find him, and he was standing in the kitchen, outside the door leading to the basement. I peered through the window top of the door and didn't see anything, but he was going crazy, jumping against the door. I managed to open the door, go through, and close it again quickly, so he couldn't get out. I flipped on the light and tried the door handle that led to the back patio. It was still locked, which made me feel somewhat better. So I slowly crept down the stairs, barefoot and wearing only a t-shirt, and flipped on the light at the foot of the stairway. 2 masked pairs of round eyes stared up at me. I froze. There was one large, overfed raccoon sitting on top of a dresser, eating cat food from a bowl I kept there for my cat. A smaller raccoon watched me from atop a bookcase. I realized that I must have forgotten to put the panel in the doggy door that led outside, and these guys decided to come in and investigate. What I did next came naturally, but people have told me since that it was rather foolish. I clapped my hands and shouted, "Out, get out now." While I was still standing at the foot of the stairs, both raccoons jumped down from their perches, obediently climbed back up the stairs, and exited through the doggy door. Shaking like a leaf, I pushed the panel back into the opening and never again left it out after dark. When I was growing up in my childhood home, I had a bedroom upstairs that had a regular door, like a closet, that opened directly into the attic. It was a big attic and creepy as hell. My bed was only a few feet away from the door, and it wasn't unusual to wake up to the sound of someone knocking from the other side. I would always dart out of there and sleep in the living room, and the incidents were relatively rare, so I usually would revert back to my normal routine after a few days. Then the cycle would repeat. I used to have friends stay the night who also would wake up to the knocking sound. At first they thought I was messing with them until I walked into the room while it was happening. I wasn't ever brave enough to open the door. One night when I was about 17, I was up very late going through some old cassette tapes. I was sitting with my back against the attic door. The knocking started again. It sounded just like someone was standing on the other side and knocking with their fist. I could feel the vibration on my back. I was really freaked out and woke up my brother. He went barging into the attic, and of course no one was there. He thought I was full of shit, of course. His little sister is being dramatic. But it was real. One night I was fast asleep, and I woke up with an uneasy feeling. There wasn't much light in the room, but I was lying in bed on my side, and I could see it was darker than normal. I realized the door was wide open. That dark open space was literally 3 feet away from me. I'll never forget how terrified I was to stand up in my bed and turn on the fan light. I moved out soon after and promptly forgot about my experience, rationalizing it as my imagination or something. Fast forward 10 years later, and I was freshly divorced and moved back in with my parents so I could go back to school. I was really depressed back then, and at first the house was quiet. I remember telling my mom about my experiences, and she agreed that she had also heard the knocking and footsteps for many years. My dad was diagnosed with cancer soon after, and he declined quickly. He opted for hospice care at home. Many hospice nurses cycled through, but they didn't last long because they were scared of the footsteps going up and down the stairs and the knocking noises. As my dad neared death, it sounded like a virtual party was going on in the room above, my room, with multiple sets of heavy footsteps. The nurses were fascinated by the sight and some refused to stay. One even asked my mom, "Can you please tell your daughter to stop stomping up and down the stairs at night?" I wasn't there when that happened. No one else was. My dad died a few weeks later, and from the moment he drew his last breath, we never heard another noise. It's been 15 years since that happened. I'm very level-headed and never used to believe in paranormal stuff. I don't know what all those events were exactly, but they were real. And beyond what we can understand. Something happened when I was in high school that I still can't explain, and others saw the same thing I did. When I was about 14-15, my friends and I would go out late at night and just walk through the suburban neighborhood and maybe cause a little mischief here and there. I know, dumb. We did it almost every Friday and Saturday night. It was a pretty big subdivision/neighborhood, and the houses were about 30 to 50 feet apart, so it wasn't like it was wilderness. One night, one of my friends wandered off to piss or something while we waited for him on the road. After about 10 minutes passed, he hadn't come back, so we started looking for him in case he got lost or something. We searched for about 30 minutes and had no luck at all. Eventually, we were in someone's backyard, and there was a large bush in the middle of it, about 15 feet wide by 10 feet tall. Suddenly, from the middle of this bush, there was a very deep, low growl that went on for about 30 seconds. We stood there a little shocked. Although there were sometimes bears in the area, they would be black bears, and whatever this was, it sounded much, much bigger. After the growling stopped, the entire bush started shaking violently, and then these rather big branches, at least 3 to 4 feet long and pretty thick, started launching out of the bush and at least 40 to 50 feet into the air, about 7 or 8 of them. We were frozen, watching this, 4 of us. A few of the branches landed on the roof of the house with a loud bang, and the homeowner turned on the lights to look into their yard. As soon as the light came on, the bush stopped shaking, and it was dead quiet. I don't know of any animal that is capable of doing what we saw that night, especially where it happened, New Jersey. And every one of us saw the same thing, so it wasn't some type of hallucination. It was 2000, and I was 14, doing a summer camp in LA. The camp had a 2-week trip to Northern California, including whitewater rafting in the American River by Sacramento. My parents paid up, and off I went. Sometime during the second or third day, we reached Sequoia National Park and camp and hike around. One day we camp out by a lake. I don't remember the name, but it did have a permanent bathroom and shower facilities. The sun was setting over the lake, and while the counselors were preparing dinner, we were playing by the lake. I had the old disposable cameras and a nice set of binoculars my parents gave me. I was taking some pictures of the sun slowly setting when I noticed a boat on the bank. I don't remember if it was an island on the lake or the other shore. I check it out with my binoculars and see a guy crouched down on the other side of the boat. I was on a hill at the campsite and thus could see into and over the boat. He was washing something, I think a knife, in the water. I'm trying to figure out what he's doing. Suddenly, he stands up and looks right at me. I broke contact and went back to camp, telling myself there's no way he could have seen me since we were about 3,000 to 4,000 feet away. I had a nagging feeling in my head, so I quickly looked back at the lake, and holy shit, there's his boat coming right toward the dock by the camp. I was scared to tell anyone but finally decided to tell my counselor. I don't think he believed me, but he went to check it out while I sat by the campfire. All the counselors had walkie-talkies, and not 2 minutes later, I heard them go off on the nearby counselors. All the remaining male counselors, 4 or 5 of them, rush over toward the lake. That's when I see my counselor crest over the hill into camp, backing up slowly and talking to someone. Then I see the person from the boat walking after him. He somehow made me out through all the other kids, the tent, and the fire and pointed a big Rambo-type knife in my direction, saying something I couldn't make out. By then the other counselors back him up, and the guy turns around to his boat. The counselors bring everyone in by the fire to eat dinner. I'm scared as it is, and even more so since I can clearly see 2 counselors standing off by the road and the lake, obviously as watchouts. I asked what happened, but no one would say anything. By now the sun has set, and a truck rolls in. A park ranger gets out with a pistol on his hip. He tells us there have been bear sightings, and we need to move all our tents by the fire. Our tents were scattered around in a wide circle beforehand, about 50 feet from the fire, but we moved them into a tight circle maybe 15 feet away from the fire. Another ranger shows up by then. One has his truck by the road/tree line and the other towards the lake. They tell us to go to sleep, and I spend the whole night thinking someone will just drag my tent into the woods or stab me through the tent. The next morning, everyone is alive. Instead of showering or eating breakfast, we immediately pack up and leave. The last thing I saw was a third-generation truck with a boat on a trailer backing up toward the lake. No one ever told me what happened. We didn't have smartphones or internet access, but by the time I got home, I had largely forgotten the incident. I truly wish I could remember the name of the lake or campsite. Non-believer here, but I have experienced something I can't begin to rationally explain. Back in 2012, I was hanging out with a friend in his house. He had explained to me and our other friend that the house had some weird shit. At the time, I was a little more open to things of that nature but still heavily skeptical. It was the middle of the summer in Texas, and we had the window open and the fan on. At the time, I didn't get cold. Not that I was incapable of feeling cold, but nothing in Texas had made me cold by this point. He explained that there had been several murder/suicides in the house, most of which occurred in what is now the computer room. He also mentioned that at certain times, you could see some of the apparitions in the mirror located in the adjacent bathroom, which reflected the ceiling fan in the computer room. While that was a little unsettling, it didn't stop us from having a ton of fun. We were, and still are, Giant Magic, the Gathering nerds, and we were looking at cards. Well, at some point, I know it was exactly midnight now, but I didn't then. I turned to my friends and said that I was freezing cold. They looked at each other, completely perplexed. They knew that I was infamous for parading around in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt during the winter, with no issue. The friend who lived in the house looked at the mirror and told me to do the same, since he saw the previous owner hanging. I looked, and I didn't see a man hanging. What I saw was smoke. I saw a thick, billowing cloud of black smoke. Needless to say, there was no smoke anywhere but in the mirror. Our other friend could not verify what he saw in the mirror because, in that moment, he received a text. It was from his long-distance girlfriend in California. She has the self-proclaimed ability to see auras and often saw one of her passed-away relatives. She texted him to tell him that she awoke from her sleep, and when she opened her eyes, instead of seeing a myriad of auras resonating from the city like she normally does, she saw nothing. It was pitch black for her, and her deceased relative was nowhere to be found. The next day, we all collaborated to try to determine an explanation, but nothing we came up with could explain anything. Maybe someone on here knows something. Maybe someone can explain. However, I am unable to provide a rational explanation. I am an atheist, and I do not believe in the supernatural. And to further muddle things for my beliefs, maybe this is tied to it, maybe not, but I experience a higher than normal amount of déjà vu events. Granted, I don't know the statistics of normal, but given how much I have heard about it versus how much I have experienced it, I feel that having several events within a month on several occasions is abnormal. It has gotten to the point where the second that feeling of déjà vu hits, I am physically and mentally weakened. In the recent few bouts with this, I nearly collapsed. I wasn't sure exactly how to flare this, as I feel it may fall under a few categories. If you have any ideas, I would appreciate your answers. Almost a decade has passed, and I have not forgotten that night. The house where these events occurred was an ordinary brick house, built in the 1960s, nothing special. Up until we moved in, nothing remarkable ever happened there, murders, crimes, etc. My wife, then my girlfriend, had always claimed the house gave her an unsettling feeling. She would often retreat to the garage to dry her hair before school when she was home alone, too spooked to be inside. She once swore that while practicing guitar, she heard something call her name multiple times, only to flee the house in fear. Her mother, well, let's just say she didn't exactly ease the situation, neglectful, to put it mildly. At the time, we were both in our late teens. She and her mother lived in the house, but I often stayed several nights a week while her mother wandered off. After a long Christmas day of visiting family for the holidays, Christmas meals, gift exchanges, the usual rounds, we were both carrying armfuls of presents. I asked her to head into the living room and set the gifts down while I locked up. She went ahead, disappearing through the kitchen and out of sight. I followed, dropping my load by the door, locking it behind me before picking everything back up. I made my way through the kitchen and into the hallway, a long stretch that ran the length of the house. To the immediate right was a bedroom, and just beyond, a large foyer that led to the den. Down the hallway, there was a bathroom, and at the very end, 2 more bedrooms. As I reached the hallway, balancing the gifts, I glimpsed my wife entering the bathroom. I decided to sneak up on her, a little game we often played. I tiptoed past the bedroom on my right and crept toward the bathroom. But just as I was about to reach the door, I heard her voice, clear as day, calling from the den, "What are you doing?" A chill ran down my spine. I backed up, my heart racing, grabbed the bags, and rushed into the den. "I saw you go into the bathroom," I explained, breathless. She was confused, her expression blank. We both brushed it off, perhaps fatigue had set in after a long day of travel and family visits. But that was just the beginning. The dreams started soon after, vivid and haunting. I'd find myself wandering through a forest that felt vaguely familiar. Ahead, in a clearing, stood an old one-room schoolhouse, like something out of the early 1800s. As I got closer, the trees seemed to come alive with the horrifying sight of children's bodies hanging from the branches. I would reach the schoolhouse, step inside, and just as I was about to enter, I would wake up, my throat tight, unable to scream. This dream recurred, but over the course of years, a few times a month. As the dreams intensified, the house began to feel alive in ways that were hard to ignore. Things moved without explanation. Objects were misplaced or vanished entirely. One night, while my wife was in the shower, I decided to sneak up on her, as I often did, but before I could even get close, a lotion bottle flew off her dresser, hitting me square in the head. The dresser was several feet away and much shorter than me, and there was no logical reason for the bottle to have flown in that direction. It didn't simply fall, it was as though something had thrown it at me. Another time, I awoke to my wife mumbling what sounded like a foreign language, German, maybe. Her voice was not hers and very unsettling. The strange occurrences didn't end there. I was woken in the dead of night by a disturbing sound, laughter mixed with crying, low and childlike, as if someone were sitting beside the bed. I turned on the light, but there was nothing. Another time, I awoke to see what I believed was the same figure I thought was my wife move quickly past the bedroom door. These eerie events continued for over 2 years, but eventually, we moved out. After that, the strange occurrences ceased, and we lived peacefully. Her mother, who had long since moved out, was a devout Christian, borderline fanatic, in fact. The house was filled with religious imagery, pictures of saints, tapestries, and scripture. Like she was trying too hard to make up for something. She often spoke of strange things she'd heard and seen while she continued living there. Years passed. My wife became pregnant, and her mother, now living with a man, offered us that. I was sitting on his bed with my feet on the floor smoking a cigarette while he was getting snacks and drinks. I still can't explain what happened next, even after almost 30 years, and it sometimes haunts me. Something sat on the bed next to me. I felt it. I saw the imprint on the bed next to me. I can still see it as if it's happening right now. I felt the springs move under my ass. Something was there. I was frozen, not so much in fear, but rather in disbelief at what I was seeing. Then I felt a little poof of ice-cold air on the back of my neck just under my right ear. The side that the imprint was on was the bed. It was June or July in New England. We were poor and had no air conditioning. The window was open behind me. Hot, muggy afternoon. There was nowhere the cold air could have come from. Then my buddy opened the door, and he looked spooked. He looked spooked because he saw my face and thought I was spooked, and then it was gone. The imprint. I felt it. The bed went back to normal. And he started telling me I was white and looked terrified and asked what happened. I told him. He didn't question me at all. He saw the look on my face. We just got up and walked over to my house with our movie and snacks. We didn't bring up the subject again for several years. Still to this day we've tried to come up with a logical explanation and just can't. It wasn't a ghost. It just wasn't. But what? What the hell was it? This happened almost 7 years ago in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. I went on a camping trip with my twin brother, our friend, and my new puppy. We decided to go to a nearby public use cabin that is first come, first serve. We were teenagers at the time, so we had our mom drop us off at the trailhead and planned on meeting her the next day at a certain time. We start hiking and get about 4 miles back to a moose camp, a place moose hunters camp, and decide to stay there because we saw a car parked at the trailhead. We didn't pass anyone on the trail, so we assume the cabin is taken. So we put up our tents and start a fire, make some dinner, and then go exploring. We have some target practice with the shotgun and then head back to camp. Our friend who was with us insisted on calling his girlfriend, so I allowed him to use my phone. There is only one bar of service, so the call keeps getting dropped, and eventually my phone dies. I decide it's bedtime, so I take the gun and the puppy into my tent and go to sleep. I wake up to my brother shaking my tent and asking me, "Did you hear that?" Now, I'm not exactly the most rational of people, so I don't really believe there is anything out there, but I get up anyway just to appease him. It's pitch black out at this point. We sit by the fire for about 10 minutes, and I don't hear anything, so I say I'm going back to sleep. I lay down, and not 5 minutes later I hear a big crash out in the woods. I ask my brother, "Did you hear that?" He replies, "Yep." So I take a flashlight and the shotgun and go by the fire. My brother and I were born and raised in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, so we know about the wildlife and how to deal with encounters. So we make noise and throw more wood on the fire to scare away whatever it is. It doesn't work. We start hearing crashing, increasingly frequent, circling us and the tent. Whatever it is, there are more than one. They make no sounds except for the crashing noises around them. You would expect to hear grunts from bears and yips from wolves. Moses would have moved on with us making so much noise. It goes on for hours, the circle getting tighter and tighter. They completely ignore my pack that contains all of our food that is tied in a tree a ways away. Their focus is on us. When a shadow passed between our tents, we decided it was time to leave. I get my phone, it turns on, and I call my mom. Magically I have 2 bars, and I tell her to come get us now. I hear, "I'm on my way." And the phone dies completely. It won't turn back on. I tell the boys it's time to pack our things and go. They, of course, protest, saying we should leave it, but I can't bring myself to do that. We pack everything and move to my pack hanging in a tree. Whatever these things are, they are still circling us. I cut my pack down, and right after it hits, I hear a loud crash about 50 feet behind us. At the same time, our friend who is facing the other way sees a shadowy form and yells, "What the duck was that?" We know it's time to move. I take rope and make a leash for my puppy, but he is trembling so hard he can't walk. I make my brother carry him. The puppy is about 30 pounds, so it's not really easy. We start back for the road. The trail is pretty swampy and muddy. It wasn't an issue in the daylight when we weren't being stalked by God knows what. I'm walking in the back with a flashlight in my teeth and the shotgun half-cocked. My brother is in the middle with the puppy, and our friend is in the lead. We are slipping and sliding all over the place, and we are still surrounded. We keep seeing things pass on the trail ahead and behind. When we are about a 1/4 mile from the road, we stop hearing them. I must say I have never in my life been more relieved than I was when I saw my mom waiting for us. We loaded the packs and got the hell out of there. We told my mom what happened, and she was pretty freaked out. Well, she was already freaking out because of the phone call. I have never experienced anything like that before or after. I have been back to the same area multiple times with no issues. I couldn't tell you what was out there, and to be honest, I don't care to find out. This happened about a month after I bought my house last year. By and large, this place feels safer than any other house I've ever lived in, but it has its quirks. After all, it does back into a green space that is actually an ancient native burial ground. I was sleeping when a thudding noise downstairs woke me up. I saw my cats were in bed with me, so they weren't making the noise. My bedroom is in an open loft, and the ground floor is almost all open. I'd left a lamp and the TV on downstairs, and I could clearly see the light and hear the TV playing quietly. I was just about to get out of bed when everything went dark. And when I say dark, I mean dark. Pitch black. There was no power outage, my battery backups did not emit a beep, and they would have continued to power the lamp and TV. The moonlight coming through the window was gone. The glow of the streetlights was gone. All light was gone. A high-pitched squeal started, and I froze. It was like sleep paralysis, but I was already standing up. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, everything was completely black, and there was this endless squealing and occasional thudding noise. And, strangely enough, I didn't feel frightened, I felt angry. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours. And from how badly cramped my legs were for the next few days, I'd say it may well have been hours. When I finally unfroze, the light hadn't come back yet. I made my way downstairs, carefully. I have alternating step loft stairs, and they are difficult to walk down when you can't see. I got to the living room and opened a curtain. When I put my face close enough to the window, I could see light outside, but it was like there was a fog of blackness inside my house that was just starting to fade away. I walked over to the lamp, and sure enough, I could see it if I stood really, really close. Then the fog lifted away all at once, and at the same moment I could hear my shower curtain ripped off the hooks. There was some minor damage, things pushed off of the table, the shower curtain ripped down, the fridge door opened, the large, heavy garbage can I keep on the porch knocked over, and some new scratches on the hardwood floor. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to be a bother. I haven't been able to figure out what it was. The few people I have told say I was probably sleepwalking or something, or that it was just a dream, but I really don't think it was. I've had crazy dreams before, but no crazy dream ever felt like that, and I don't sleepwalk, or at least I've never been aware of it before. I also don't understand why I was angry instead of terrified. Nothing that extreme had happened since, and I hope it doesn't happen again. My cats never once came downstairs through all this. I found them under the bed later when I went back up. I lived in my previous apartment for 2 years and experienced 2 separate incidents that my girlfriend and I cannot explain. I've never shared these, but I feel one of the occurrences is weirder than a lot of stuff I see and hear. The first incident happened while changing out the clothes we had hung in our closet for the winter. We were replacing the summer clothes with the winter ones. Unfortunately, our closet in this apartment was pretty small, so it was something that had to be done when the seasons officially changed. I had just finished boxing up the short sleeves and had a closet full of empty hangers. I had just turned to grab a long sleeve shirt from the box sitting on the floor and turned back to a closet full of hangers swinging in perfect unison. I remember freezing up and telling my girlfriend, who was sitting on the bed at the time, to come take a look at this shit. She was equally freaked out, and she confirmed that nothing had even been near the closet in the last 2 to 3 minutes. These were swinging in the closet as if someone pushed them all at the exact time, not just small swaying back and forth. I've managed to convince myself that it could have been something structural with the apartment, as it was an old duplex, and we didn't notice or something of the sort. It freaked me out, but people can offer a lot of potential solutions to something as simple as swinging hangers. So I basically dismissed what had happened as just a weird incident until the actual ducked up night we really can't explain. A little background info to better explain why this next one is creepy and the layout of our bedroom. Like I said before, it was a duplex, but it was a 2-story home converted into an upper/lower. The lower level had odd dimensions in rooms, and more than likely it's because they weren't designed to be bedrooms. Regardless, our room was extremely long but fairly narrow. The light switch was next to the door, which was about 5 feet away from the end of our bed for the overhead light on the ceiling fan, and we had a touch lamp sitting on the nightstand directly next to the bed. Our TV was on the far side of the room, and my girlfriend sleeps with it on every night. I'm a heavy sleeper and don't mind the light/noise, so it works out fine for both of us. Dead silence actually wakes her up, so this stays on all night. Now, one night between 3 and 3:30, we were both sitting up in bed under the blankets, with our backs against the wall, all the lights in the room on and the TV turned off. Both I and my girlfriend look at each other completely wide awake before I ask, "What the duck are we doing?" Neither one of us knows. We don't remember waking up, we didn't turn off the TV, and we don't remember sitting up. And we sure as shit didn't turn on all the lights in our room that require you to physically get out of bed to flip the light switch. The fact that we were both completely awake, staring at a blank ducking TV screen with no explanation for any of it, still creeps me out just a type. Sleepwalking I would understand if I was alone in this, but we were both sitting up staring straight until I kind of snapped to and said something. I have no idea how long we were sitting like this. Both of our memories of that night start with realizing the other person is sitting up in bed next to me. It's still the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, and I haven't really seen anything similar online. This is going to sound crazy, but I have so many. The house I grew up in was creepy as hell. I had always experienced unsettling events while living there. The earliest one was when I was a toddler in one of those mobile bouncy chairs hopping around in the backyard with my 5-year-old sister and mom. The phone rings, and mom runs to go grab it. In the few minutes she is gone, I manage to bounce my way across the yard and into the pool. My sister hears the splash, and her first instinct is to jump in after me. She's always had a strong maternal instinct when it comes to my brothers and me, when a black, distorted figure appears next to her, telling her to not save me and that I would be fine on my own. Thank God she ignored this apparition and jumped in and grabbed me. My mom returns about 2 minutes later to find my sister practically drowning while trying to keep me above water. I'm so thankful for her. At the age of 12, I finally received permission to spend a few hours alone at home. My mom had just a few minutes before she left for the grocery store. I insisted on staying home, and she granted my wish. I remember sitting in a swivel chair watching some show on the telly with my ponytail draped over the back of the headrest. A few minutes after my mom left, I felt what I thought was a light tug on my hair, which I quickly disregarded as my hair being caught on something, and presumed watching whichever show was on at the time. Then, a few moments later, I felt a tug. I panicked and rushed into the kitchen, where I patiently waited for my mother for an hour. Later on I examined the chair to see if in any way my hair could have just been caught on something, but the chair is a solid shape made of velvet. A few years later we got a dog who would stand at the top of the stairs growling and barking at that specific corner of the house where the TV used to be. The last instance I can remember right now is a conversation I had with my sister about 2 years ago. My sister's and my rooms were right next to each other, and my closet wall was her wall at the head of her bed. I confided in her that when I was a teen, I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow-like male figure in the corner of my room near my closet. My sister was shocked and told me she regularly experienced the same thing too. Flash forward 6 months after we move out, and I discovered that the son of the previous tenants ended himself in my closet. Obviously I had a lot of good memories in that house and growing up with my family, but boy am I glad to have gotten the duck out of there. My first camping experience. For context, this happened to me while camping on the school grounds, something related to Girl Scouts. Each day we were assigned different roles to help during eating hours. At that time, my friend MJ and I were chosen to be on dish duty, which meant we were to wash the dishes after meals. MJ and I received instructions to take a break while our other teammates were busy cooking and providing assistance. We were walking back to our room, laughing because we remembered one of our classmates said that one of the Boy Scouts from the school had an attractive cousin. It was really funny, though. Although this event occurred a long time ago, I still remember it vividly because it frightened me. I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time. We entered our room and went to the single stall at the corner, which was our washroom. MJ was ahead of me and arrived at the stall first. She told me that someone was inside because she heard the faucet running and the toilet flushing. So, we waited in line for the person to come out. We kept on waiting until MJ said she had to go out and check on our classmates and schoolmates. She left me there, and I continued waiting for so long. I was sure someone was in there because the faucet was obviously running and the toilet flushed. Our toilet's flush system was broken too, so an object's weight couldn't have triggered the flush button. It had to be flushed manually. But it was odd, the stall's light was turned off. MJ returned about 10 minutes later to see if I had finished my bath. I explained how the person still hadn't come out. We tried knocking, but nobody answered. So, we opened the unlocked door. The faucet was off, and no one was inside. I was frightened at that time. Can anyone explain this? The faucet could have been running because our teacher, who was in the room, could have turned it on, but no, I had been there the whole time, keeping my eye on the washroom stall. So it would be impossible because the faucet was turned off tight when we opened it. And the flushing too. I still wonder what it could have been. I moved to another country for my girlfriend, and we moved into a house and experienced some unexplainable things. Okay, so I want to tell you about me moving away from my home country and all the way to Germany for my girlfriend, and then we ended up moving to an, I don't know, haunted house? If it's even haunted, there are things I can't explain for sure that have happened here. I want to say that I also always look for an explanation for everything, but there are some things I can't explain at all. Okay, so we moved from an apartment in a big building to a house with 2 apartments where her parents live in the one under us and we live in the top one. We also have an attic over us, but there are only some boxes, an old closet, and Christmas stuff up there. One of the things that we keep hearing is clicking, like tapping from outside the door or something. The funny thing is, this always happens late at night, and we know the parents usually go to sleep early, so they are also really silent. The clicking can be explained by the radiator for the heaters we have, but something that we can't explain is the sound of cats running around. We have 2 cats, so it sounds similar to when they are running around, but with them, it sounds kind of heavy? If I can say that, and when we hear it, then it kind of sounds light, and this happens when we have both cats sleeping in our bed, we don't know what it comes from. We also hear stuff moving up in the attic and footsteps or doors opening and closing. Again, this mostly happens late at night when I and my girlfriend are watching TV or just sitting in the living room minding our own business on each tablet. This isn't happening every evening, but we can't explain all of these events. There is also one that really is creeping me out that made me not being able to be home alone, at least when I'm going to go to sleep. I have talked to my girlfriend about this, and she explained she had a similar event happen to her a while after it happened to me. So about 2 to 3 months after we moved in here, we were lying in bed, and we kind of had gotten everything in order so the apartment looked like a home. We had gone to bed early because my girlfriend had to work the day after and I had a job interview. After my girlfriend fell asleep, I would sit up like a maximum of 1 hour later either to read, scroll on TikTok, or play games on my phone. I remember I heard a whisper from thieving room, and at first I thought it was the TV that was on, that we had forgotten to turn it off. I stood up and checked, but no, it was off. I checked the gaming room in case I had left the PC on with my speaker still connected, but no, it was off. I tried not thinking more about it and went back to bed. BTW, my girlfriend is not talking in her sleep either, so I know it wasn't her either. The thought hit me, but I figured out that wasn't the case either. When I lay back in bed to keep on being on my phone, I heard a clear whisper inside the room, a clear hello like it was a question. I turned on the light, and my girlfriend woke up. She is kind of a light sleeper at times, and she asked me what the hell I was doing. I didn't want to tell her there and then because she would maybe think I was crazy, so I kept it to myself. When I told her a few months later, she would say that she had heard the same thing just slightly 4 months after me. There have been more things like things disappearing and turning up in other places where we didn't leave them and some other small things, but these were the main things that happened to us. Yeah, that was kind of my little story about things I have experienced. And we are still experiencing some of the same things. It's been a while since the whisper, but it happened 1 or 2 times more at least to me after the first time. As a kid, I saw something I can't explain. I think about this every now and then because I can't seem to tell if it was real or something my brain imagined. When I was a kid, about 6 or 7, I was in my backyard, which is pretty big and has a clear view of the sky, and I was doing what I always did, talking to myself for an hour about how it would be if I had superpowers or some crap. The moment from that day that I can remember pretty clearly is when I looked up into the night sky and saw 3 greenish-blackish orbs far off in the distance just circling around each other in a triangle-like formation, and I was just really enthralled by them. They were not moving at all, they seemed to hover for a good minute before zipping around a bit and then disappearing. I remember vividly going into my house and telling my dad I saw a spaceship and him laughing me off like the dumb kid I was. Frankly, I don't know if this really happened. Was it a dream or possibly a false memory? Please, I need closure on this because this comes up every time I and my friends talk about paranormal stuff. I experienced something I can't explain in the Liberties area of Dublin, Ireland. I was with my girlfriend in the Liberties in Dublin on a bright early summer's day last year. We went to a pub for a pint. We were entirely sober. We got our drinks, sat down, and 2 minutes later I had to pee. The toilets were on the basement level, as many small Dublin pubs are. This is difficult to write, so bear with me. I went down the stairs and turned right into the men's toilet. A urinal ran along the length of the toilet wall, and I walked to the furthest end away from the door, as you do, and began pissing. Bear in mind that this was a small Dublin pub, and the toilets reflected that. I was maybe 4 feet away from the door. As I was pissing, the door moved almost imperceptibly, and I, of course, took no notice, drafts, etc., etc. I was looking down at myself, as you do, when I became aware that someone was in the room with me. And this is something I find difficult to countenance, was acutely aware that someone/something was right next to me. This all happened in seconds as I finished pissing. I looked to my right, and not 2 feet away from me was, I don't know how to describe it. A black, amorphous shadow or shape that wasn't a property of the physicality around me. In ways I can't describe, this thing was sentient and knew I was there. To my dying day, I will swear this is true. Every hair on my body stood up, and this thing was there with me. Like I said, this was a matter of seconds. I was being regarded. In 1 second I was out the door and up the stairs to the sunlit pub. My girlfriend saw me immediately. Ashen-faced and starting to cry, my girlfriend immediately sensed that something was amiss. I don't cry easily, and I swear to you that what happened that day struck me to my very core and unsettled me entirely. As an addendum, I asked the landlord if there was a history of such stuff there, and he said no. If you know the Liberties pubs, you know how brave I was to ask that. They do not duck around. I have since given more credence to others' stories but still have difficulty reconciling what I experienced with my worldview. This happened to me about 20 years ago when I was living in very rural southeastern Montana. One Saturday afternoon, a little after 4 o'clock, I suddenly remembered that I had to return some library books that were due that day, and the library closed at 5 o'clock. The library was 45 minutes away if you stuck to the highways and 35 to 40 minutes away if you took a shortcut using a dirt road. The dirt road cut through ranch land on either side and was also a shortcut to the nearest city, 8,000 people at that time, big for this part of Montana, so it was relatively well traveled. If you drove along it during the day, you'd probably see 1 to 3 other cars coming and going. So I took the dirt road to give myself a few minutes to look around the library for more books before it closed. I was driving a big SUV that belonged to the school I worked at, and I was driving pretty fast. At some point, I turned a right-hand bend in the road, and then I saw this scene before me. On the right side of the dirt road was a pickup truck parked perpendicularly to the road, on the strip of grass in between the road and a barbed wire fence, with its front grille parked against the fence. On the other side of the fence, where the cattle would be, there was a man in a white t-shirt and jeans kneeling on the ground, sitting back on his heels and looking down at the ground in front of him. His back was to the fence, so I saw him from his side view as I approached, and he did not react or move at all while my very loud SUV passed by. On the roadside of the fence, through the tall grass, I saw a man's arm waving slowly in the air. The grass obscured his body from my sight, but I could tell that there was a man lying parallel to the road, and inches away from the road, lying on his back, with his head pointed back toward the pickup truck, and waving his arm. He waved in a slow, jerky movement, like he was in a daze or too weak to wave vigorously. He did not sit up as I drove by. There was no visible damage to the truck or the fence that I could see, there was no debris or skid marks in the dirt road, and I had not had to swerve around the truck while driving, but my impression was that the truck had gotten into an accident and the man lying in the grass was injured and trying to flag me down for help. This scene caught me off guard since I hadn't been able to see it until I turned around the curve in the road, so it took me a few moments to register what I had seen, and by that time, I had driven past the scene and couldn't see it in my rearview mirror. To cut an already long story short, I decided not to stop and check on the men, but instead I'd stop at the sheriff's station, that just so happened to be in the same building as the library, to let them know that I had seen an accident on the dirt road and maybe someone should go check it out. However, upon further reflection about the scene, it appeared increasingly nonsensical to me. If the man lying in the grass was injured, why didn't the other kneeling man also wave me down for help or react at all to me driving past them? How was the man injured? There was no sign of an accident that I could see. But why else would someone lie that close to a dirt road and not sit up as a vehicle approached, unless he was injured? How was he injured? I thought about it and decided not to stop at the sheriff's station, figuring that another car would pass by and help the men if they were still there. I arrived at the library, dropped off my books and got new ones, and left as it closed at 5 o'clock. The sun had already set, and I didn't want to drive down the dirt road. I was feeling really guilty about not stopping and didn't want to pass the strange scene again in the pitch black darkness, so I drove the highways home. The next day, I was still feeling guilty, so I decided to drive down the dirt road again to see if I could see any traces of an accident or any other clues about what had happened to these two men. Here is where things got really strange. I drove the entire length of the dirt road, forward and back, and not only was there no sign of an accident, there was no spot along the road where the barbed wire fence wasn't about a foot away from the road. There was nowhere a pickup truck could have parked with its front grille touching the fence without completely blocking the road, and I had not had to swerve around the truck at all as I passed it. And I'm certain that's what I had seen. And, there was no tall grass growing at any point along the road. It was all high desert scrub plants, sparsely growing and about an inch tall. There was nowhere a man could have been lying next to the road where I wouldn't have seen the entire man with nothing blocking my view, especially from my high vantage point seated in an SUV. But I hadn't, all I had seen of him was his arm raised in the air above tall grass, slowly waving. And this was a very rural road, no one was out there mowing the grass to keep it tidy. In fact, there wasn't any grass growing there at all. There was nothing for anyone to mow. So there was no way I could have seen what I saw. And yet I did see it. But I can't think of any explanation for what I saw, natural or supernatural. Neither they were ghosts. Nor it was a time warp. Makes sense. Ghosts and time warps cannot account for the movement of a fence's placement or the changes in the type of vegetation growing in the ground. And the truck had looked contemporary to the 2000s, too, so I don't know what I witnessed that day, and it's haunted me ever since. This literally just happened, and I'm typing to tell you guys as I sit in my bathroom waiting for my parents to answer so I can go back home. I just moved to Cape Cod. I live in a weird little house that I found in the quiet town of East Falmouth. The house is a little rundown, but after considering the fact that it is technically okay to live in and has a really good price, I was willing to put up with it. I was up all night for the 4th night in a row, as I've been talking to this girl that I met online. Weird shit has been happening to me since I met her. See, I've always been one to knock a scary story as a coincidence or flat out made up, and of course, this girl is full of ghost stories. I've never felt as wrong hearing them as I do when she tells them. It's currently 5 a.m., and about 20 minutes ago, she told me that she had to take a quick nap before school. This was after she was telling me ghost stories all ducking night. She started sending me memes after telling me ghost stories, and I still felt sick no matter how many funny memes she sent me. She kept telling me that she was feeling watched, and every time she said that, I started to feel like I was being watched. She kept saying she saw something out of the corner of her eye, and I would see it too. She then just told me before she got off the phone that she knew something was in the room with her, and that's when I knew it. There was something in the room with me. I ignored it. She hung up. Earlier in the night, I had cracked a seltzer water, and right after she hung up, the bubbles started growing louder and louder until it was deafening. I was sitting in the guest room, and I have a curtain divider that splits the two beds, and it started moving like crazy. I decided to run, but first I had to move the curtain, and I had a feeling that when I did, I would see what it was. I contemplated for a second, but with the curtain open. Nothing. Feeling blessed, I rushed towards the door, desperate to escape. I ripped the door open, and there it was. It was not human, and I don't know what it was. I can only describe it as a figure made of shapes with a face, and the features of the face were upside down, but the head wasn't. There's something in my house. I ran past it, but I had to push it through. It felt like nothing and something at the same time. I glanced back, only to find it gone. I don't know if I should call the police, I don't know who to tell. They will think I'm crazy. I told my parents the whole story, but they still haven't answered me. What should I do? Help. Mysterious hiker? I am 22 now. This happened when I was around 13 to 14. I and my mother were on a hike through Panther Creek Trail in northern Georgia. We hiked around 4 to 5 miles into the trail. Keep in mind we had never hiked on an actual trail, nor had we ever been to this trail or were even familiar with this stretch of wilderness, as we lived in metro Atlanta. Our goal was to reach a huge, beautiful waterfall at the end of the trail, Panther Creek Falls. There was a couple in front of us pretty much the entire hike, around 2 to 3 hours. Once we reached around the 2/3 mark, the couple in front of us were speaking with each other and said that it was getting late, and they should probably turn back before it got dark. One thing I should note is that there are parts of the trail that are very tight trails on the sides of hills that have no guard fences/rails, and the trail has a 50 to 150 feet drop into a creek at the bottom lined with huge boulders. Notably, there's a part of the trail that you actually had to shimmy across, as it was only maybe 8 to 9 inches wide and on a rock face. Back when the couple were talking about turning back, my mom heard them talking about it and told me the same, that we best turn back. Being a teen who thought he was invincible, I convinced her I could make my way to the falls quickly and turn back to meet up with her on the hike back to the parking lot. She argued but eventually let me go. After another hour or so of hiking, I made it to the falls and took some pictures as the light was fading. Nobody else was there at the base of the falls with me. I noticed it really started to get dark quickly, and I started to get a little worried since I knew it was going to be a good couple of hours to get through the trail on the way back. After an hour of hiking, I was in complete darkness, with my only light being the one from my phone. I did bring a backpack with water, a knife, and other little bits and baubles. It was a completely non-moonlit night, and the only way I was navigating was by pointing my light at the ground to see the trail to keep on it. At one point I started to get petrified by the noises of animals and forest sounds, so I decided to pull my knife out of my backpack. I held the knife for the majority of 3 to 4 miles until I got to the part where you have to shimmy across, and so I had to put my phone light in my pocket so I could have a hand free to grab the rock and shimmy across. As I did so, my knife fell out of my hand, and it made no noise for over 10 seconds, then hit a rock with a metallic sound way down. I knew if I fell, I was done for. Luckily, I made it across and managed to get back onto the trail. Getting my bearings, I looked at the phone to try and get service and call my mom or the police, as I felt like I was in extreme danger. I could barely see the trail at this point. I looked and saw my phone battery was at 3%. This being my only light source made me start to panic to the point of tearing up. I continued on the trail with my battery slowly fading as I used the flashlight. As I was walking, the phone flashlight only lit up about 2 to 3 feet in front of me. I mean, it was damn near pitch black, a darkness I have never before since experienced. Just as I was walking, a man emerged from the darkness in front of me, approaching from the opposite side of the trail, the direction I was heading in. He scared the absolute duck out of me. I literally jumped at the sight of him as it was so instant. That's when I noticed he had no flashlight, a small sports backpack, and an absolutely emotionless face and dead eyes staring completely past me. When I saw him and he scared me, I immediately said, "Hey, what's up, man? I'm trying to get out of here." He never said anything as he passed me. I looked back, expecting him to turn back and talk to me, but he never did. In the moment, I thought it was so strange, then I thought about it and realized, how the hell is anyone supposed to navigate this trail and its many challenges at night, in pitch black darkness, with no flashlight? To this day I still think there was no way anyone could navigate the trail at night with no light source, familiar or not. I immediately got a terrible gut feeling about him and started sprinting off of the trail through the trees towards lights and the sounds of cars in the distance. After a couple of minutes, I found myself on the side of a highway, where I then used the last little bit of my battery to call my mom, and she was crying and asking me where I was. She ended up picking me up at a gas station 2 miles away from the trail entrance, running over my foot on accident in a moment of panic to get me in the car. I later told her the whole story, and we haven't hiked since. We're not good at it, have no experience, and quite honestly, this whole experience scarred both of us. I don't know if the guy was a ghost, a person trying to catch people on the trail and do things to them, or a figment of my imagination, but I did not care to stick around long enough to find out. Unexplained experience. I'm only sharing this story since it's been on my mind from when I was a young child to now, as I'm 22. I need some answers. If not, maybe hear similar experiences. This one sat with me forever and will. I had to be about 7 to 8 years old. In Rosamond, California, staying the night at my grandparents' house. We always stayed there growing up, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. We eat dinner, have ice cream, put on a VHS tape, and fall asleep. This night my sister and I decided to switch sides of the bed we always stayed on. Now I was exposed to the door, and she was against the wall. I woke up in the middle of the night, keep in mind my grandparents' house is a mobile home, to something walking towards us. Once it came in the doorway, it was a deer or donkey-like creature. He had thin, towering branches as antlers with dead leaves trickling off each side. All it did was stand here and start humming. I was frozen with fear and thought if I maybe moved or made a sound, it would go away. Once I turned over to my sister and made a little moaning sound. It started to talk. It stopped whistling and said, "Oh no, there's a hooey friend," and proceeded to walk out of my grandparents' house, like down the hallway. I was so paralyzed with fear I didn't tell anyone until the next morning. No one believed me either. The one experience I can't explain. I'm 27 now, and my brother, who is part of the story now, is currently 23. I was about 13 when this happened, and I and my brother still remember it. I can't remember what day this occurred on, but it was a school night at about 11 p.m. My brother and I shared a room, which meant we also had a bunk bed. My brother slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom. I'll need to explain the layout a bit so you guys have some context as to why I can't explain what happened. Directly outside of our room is the main hallway to the house. To the left of our door is our parents' door, a utility closet at the very end of the hallway next to their room, and then the office room and bathroom on the opposite wall of our room. The ceilings aren't very high, there's about 3 inches of clearance between our door frame and the ceiling. This will be important later. I was lying in my bed, awake, at about 10:45 p.m. My parents were asleep, my brother was asleep, but I simply couldn't. Anytime this happened, I'd simply let my thoughts wander in any direction until I finally fell asleep. But abruptly at 11 p.m. the noise happened. Thump, thump. I lurched up in bed. It sounded like someone slammed their fists against the wall at the end of the hallway, then a couple of lighter sounding thumps right after. Everything was quiet, and I could hear my heart beating in my chest. Sitting there wondering how this didn't wake anyone else up. Then the sounds picked up, but louder. It sounded like something heavy was climbing on the walls outside in the hallway. These weren't the little scratchy like sounds of a squirrel or something stuck in the walls at all, but loud and prominent thump-thump sounds, like Spider-Man was climbing our wall back and forth in the hallway with his palms. The sound traveled back and forth twice before I heard my brother call out my name. "Jay?" He called out. "Yeah, I hear it too." The sound continued to crawl the wall very fast for what felt like 5 minutes. Then the pace slowed down. When the sound was traveling back to our door, it got to a walking pace until thump, thump right outside our door frame. Complete silence. Neither my brother nor I made any movements. We stayed quiet for 2 more minutes, expecting the noise to pick back up. I had the unsettling feeling that someone was watching me from the doorframe. After what felt like ages, I whispered, "On the count of 3, we bolt to Mom and Dad's room." We did the countdown and then sprinted. We must have sounded deranged on the other end, just a cacophony of banging on the door and yelling. My mom opened the door dazed and confused. I yelled, "Something was climbing on the walls. Did you not hear it?" She gave me a look of skepticism, but when my brother chimed in, she got concerned. My dad then swept the whole house with his shotgun, eventually giving us the whole coast is clear. What bothers me is, A, how did this not wake the parents up? The sound was loud enough to shake the whole hallway. B, if it was actually an animal, how could it sound as heavy as a person? Let alone make the sound come out of the hallway? The ceiling clearance is so small nothing that heavy could be stuck in the wall and travel past the door frame and come back with the same speed. C, if it was of a paranormal nature, why hasn't this happened more often? The only other strange experience that could remotely have anything to do with this would be the day I saw a hazy gray form behind my backyard fence. It was the rough size and shape of a person and it didn't move. Even when I had the courage to step within 8 feet of it, it still didn't move and still confused me. It wasn't a vapor or smoke or a small cloud. Just a gray mass that you could look through like your vision was colorblind on that one point behind the fence. Does anyone else experience this kind of thing? If it's a familiar phenomenon to anyone else, I'd love to know. This stuff still messes with my head, and I've never experienced anything like it since. A few years ago, before I moved out of my parents' house, I was living with them at a new house. I moved in a few weeks after they had set it all up, decorated, etc. First it started with footsteps, sounds, etc., and obviously my first thought was carbon monoxide, but we had the place tested, and it was clean. At this point, I hadn't witnessed anything that I couldn't explain, and I didn't fully believe everything that was being said. Footsteps and doors closing could be just my mind playing tricks. My stepdad had said he saw a fey against the wall to go against its weight and then topple towards me. After that we closed that door, and it seemed to die down, and only minimal things would happen, such as doors closing and opening during the night. I've moved out now, but my parents continue to report voices and other strange sounds, as well as things moving, but nothing as aggressive as I encountered. We also tried to contact the previous owner, but she refused to talk to us for one reason or another, and we did manage to pass a message through people we know, and she said something along the lines of "I don't talk about that house." There's a lighthouse on Lake Michigan that I used to work security at. It's supposedly haunted, though that's a different story. Anyways, this lighthouse's pier gets a lot of fishing action year-round, but especially in the spring. I am working with another guy, and being the fisherman I am, I decide to take a stroll and see how everyone's doing as well as walk to the end of the pier. I walked, chatted with a few guys I knew, and went on back to the lighthouse. Now, real quick, the pier is going to be separated into 6 sections on each side. The north and south break arms, the south side east and west sections, and the north side. The lighthouse is the divider. The lighthouse is also on the south side, where I'm at. And there's no way to get to the other side without going around the lake or swimming. As I'm walking back, I see what looks to be a sailboat sitting in the middle of the channel on the eastern section. I could only see the lights. It would usually be normal to see a sailboat here, besides the night. It's 1 a.m., and the only thing out there is usually fishing boats. I decide to check it out. I have a few minutes left on my break, so I radio the other guard to let him know that I will be there in another second. The boat looks to be just about halfway down to the lake from the lighthouse. I thought maybe he was fishing there and didn't know you couldn't fish inside the shoreline of Lake Michigan at this time. But that's when I noticed something odd. Really odd. This boat is moving in circles. And this isn't the widest channel, maybe 50 meters across. So the next thing I think is drunk guy. Plenty of them. But as I close in, I realize something. It's dead silent. There is no wind, and more importantly, there is no engine sound. No sound at all but my breathing and footsteps. I stop and listen. Nothing. This was starting to freak me out, but I'm the security guard, so no being a pussy cat. But, as I take a step forward, it stops. The lights, 3 in a perfect triangle, and a very faint silhouette of a sailboat start moving from my left to right, right towards the break wall. WTF I think, and I instinctively run towards it. Then, it just up and disappears. Gone. But wait, no crash? No lights either? I think. I went down to where it should have been, and nothing was there. Not a trace. I hear a splash across the water. I look and see a fisherman on the north side directly across from me casting. I yell and ask him if he's seen a boat. He responds, no. I say thanks and make my way back. As I walk up the ramp to the lighthouse, I realize that he was not supposed to be fishing on this side of the big lake, so I head back out to find him, but by then he is gone. What I did see, though, was a big light at the end of the channel. I booked it. Nope, nope, nope. Turns out that light was just a spotlight for a fishing boat, but it still scared me shitless. But what about the sailboat? I still to this day have no clue what I saw that night. Creepy backpacking experience. Can anyone help explain what happened? Hey everyone. I've been thinking about this trip for some time and trying to rationalize what happened, but I can't come up with anything. I'm hoping someone here may have ideas. I went backpacking over Labor Day weekend with a couple of buddies on the Relief Reservoir Trail in Stanislaus National Forest, California. It was a quick trip, 7 miles RT, Saturday through Monday. Beautiful trail that goes through meadows and mountain passes and ends at the reservoir. I've gone on several trips in the past, but this trail was the least untouched I've ever seen. Human presence was more obvious than usual on a wilderness trip, probably because we weren't that far off from the trailhead. Pacific Gas and Electric Utility Company, owns some land out here, so we passed by trucks, old equipment, and even a porta-potty left behind from building and maintaining the dam, finished early 1900s, that borders the reservoir. We camped in a designated spot across the dam in proximity to the lake. There were 4 or 5 old stumps made from cut logs surrounding the fire ring. There were also a couple of old tin boats that were stood up and securely tied to trees at our camp. About 30 feet away, there were groups of cut-down trees chained together. Not sure what for. Something felt off about the area, but I shrugged it off and figured PGE workers and day hikers hung out here too. The rest of the day was pretty ordinary. Went swimming, started a fire, and had dinner. The weird stuff started when I went to bed. I got into my tent around 9:30 p.m., and about 30 minutes later, I heard this sound behind my head, maybe 20 feet away, chhk, chhk, chhk. It sounded like two small rocks hit against each other. The sounds are rhythmic, even, 1 second pauses between each chhk. I don't think much of it, probably a few pine cones falling out of a tree. Note that throughout both nights of our trip, absolutely no wind passes through our camp, so it's very quiet. Another 30 to 45 minutes later, I'm falling asleep. Then I hear the sounds again, this time, further away in a different direction. Chhk, chhk, chhk. Again, the sounds are rhythmic and sound like two rocks hitting against each other. We didn't see any other campers in our area when we got in, and I listened to hear if anyone happened to be arriving late. There were no sounds of footsteps or voices, so I continued to ignore them and attempted to return to sleep. After some time, the rhythmic sounds return, now coming from a different direction and further away. Chhk, chhk, chhk. There are no other sounds of rustling, walking, or voices. My mind starts wandering, and I think it's uncanny there are 3 sets of 3 chhks. There are 3 of us on the trip. I try to think of what it could possibly be without going the route of supernatural. Other campers messing around? More falling pine cones? It's definitely not my 2 friends, a couple. Our tents were huddled close together. I heard them sleeping and didn't hear their tents zip open and close. They're also not the type to get out in the dark and pull a prank. And I'm not the type to leave my tent at night to check out what's making sounds. I fall asleep again. At least for a few hours. I wake up around midnight and can't fall back asleep. Eventually I hear steps approaching my tent. Probably a small animal, I think. It stops at the back of my tent, and I hear it rubbing against my tent flap. This goes on for 15 to 30 seconds before it unsuccessfully tries to get under the tent flap. Then I hear the footsteps come to the front of my tent. It again unsuccessfully tries to get under the front tent flap. The strange thing about this whole scenario is that I don't hear any sniffing, just the rustling to get under the tent. Usually a curious animal sniffs around, no? I get up and turn on the light. No sounds. I decide I'll let out my friend's name of / when the next odd thing happens. I stay up for an hour, writing in my journal about everything that happened so I'd accurately remember the details then instead of exaggerating later. I play Sudoku on my phone to get my mind off the whole thing. I place my knife nearby, sheathed. It's now 1:30 in the morning. I'm feeling more calm and decide to go back to sleep, lying down, light still on. A few minutes later, I hear something breathe out at the back of my tent. Just one loud breath out, and it was definitely a breath. I didn't hear any steps from this thing / animal moving to get here. I lose it and yell out my friend's name a few times. He wakes up and scopes out our area, shining lights into the shrubby area behind our camp. We don't see anything. I'm spooked so badly that I move my tent closer to theirs. Morning comes, and everything is all good again. I told my friends what happened, and they didn't hear anything. One of them is a deep sleeper and snores loudly, and the other wears earplugs to block out the snoring. Another normal day passes by the lake. We go on a short hike around the lake and see there's a fire road about 1 to 1.5 miles above the lake. A family of 3 had been camping there these last couple of days. They were also swimming in the lake yesterday. Could it have been them on a late walk last night? Fire, dinner, go to bed. I decided to move 2 of the tree stumps from around the fire to the back of my tent, just in case anything strange happens again. My friend also gives me earplugs to help me sleep. Again, no wind passes through our camp that night. Several hours into the night, I hear footsteps. Not this shit again, I think. I try to stay asleep, but then whatever is out there tries to touch my back tent flap again. The stumps I placed are snug up against the back of my tent, and I placed my tent up against some tall trees. I fall asleep. Never mind it, I'm tired. The next morning, we're set to leave. The same friend who I woke up the other night tells me something tried to get into this front tent flap around 5 that morning. Weirded out by my story from the other night, he stayed awake until sunrise. What happened? Has anyone experienced anything similar? My group has gone backpacking together a few times, always chalking up sounds to curious animals or trees / leaves moving, and never encountered a situation like this. I've considered it could have been an animal touching our tents, but why didn't we hear any sniffing? Why did it stick around for so long and revisit us? Are the rhythmic rock sounds a separate, explainable event? Thanks for listening. A story that happened last night, and I still can't process it. Yesterday, my dad asked me to go with him to the hospital because he forgot some of his stuff in his office or somewhere else, and it was like 10 p.m. My dad is an internist in a hospital. The hospital has buildings for different departments, for example, one for heart diseases, one for lung issues, etc. My dad wanted to speak to the head of the department. I don't know what department, though, just a little chit-chat on basic stuff. But in order to reach him, we had to go through building J9 or something like that, I think, and from J9, we went to the head of department, HOD. So we went into J9, basically an unfinished building that is abandoned, for now, I think. And is in construction, I believe, or maybe will never be constructed, just in its current state. We went in, and it was pitch black. My dad got his phone flashlight, and we walked. While walking in pitch black, we saw a guy walking towards us. He looked kind of Indian. He had a beard that was extremely long, and he had very long hair that was sitting upwards on the two sides only, and in the middle there was no hair. The man was walking and just staring at us without saying a word. My dad said, "Hey, can you open the lights here?" My dad guessed he worked at the building and asked him to turn on the lights since it was pitch black. The man just stared and went into the elevator in the building. My dad was confused but didn't think much about it. We then went to the hod and stayed there for, 30 minutes because he and my dad spoke about random things. After that, my dad wanted to go up to his office or whatever it's called to get the stuff he forgot, and the fastest way to go was through the elevator, in J9, that the man we encountered went up. We pressed the button for the elevator arrived, only to our surprise, the man we encountered was in the elevator 30 minutes after he went in the first time. He was just there. We got in the elevator and pressed my dad's office floor. The man was just staring at me and my dad back and forth without speaking. I sighed at my dad like, why is this dude staring at us like that? And suddenly the elevator stopped working. My dad called the hod and said, "Hey, the elevator stopped working on us." Hod said, "Just press the emergency button, it should work." My dad asked him, "Who's the guy working in J9? I talked to him, and he hasn't said a word and is just staring at me and my son in the elevator now." The hod was confused and said, "No one works at J9. My dad just said, "All right." He didn't think much of it. My dad told me to press the emergency button. The dude was standing in front of the buttons, so I had to press the emergency button behind him, kind of leaning my hands behind him and pressing the emergency button. Then the elevator worked, and the dude kept staring back and forth, at me then my dad, at me then my dad. My dad started waving to the dude and said, "You okay?" The dude just stared back and forth, at me then my dad, me then my dad. After 5 seconds, the elevator arrived at my dad's floor. We got out of the elevator, and the guy was still in the elevator. I and my dad got out to grab his mug and his laptop, which took us like 10 seconds. We got back to the elevator to go down to my dad's car and back home, and the elevator hadn't moved since we left it. When we pressed the button and the elevator arrived, the elevator door opened, and the man wasn't there. I started freaking out about where he was and couldn't process how he wasn't there. The elevator hasn't moved. I asked my dad where the guy was. He was confused and said, "I don't even know." We returned to our car without seeing him again. Lifetime of unexplained things. So, this is probably the most bizarre and illogical statement I can give. I am 37 years old, having been born in Poland and moved to England in 2011. In my adult life I look for logical reasons and explanations for everything. It keeps me safe and sane. It's because at a certain point in my teenage life I had to start telling myself that things that happened aren't real, and eventually they stopped. But, still, whenever there is any mention of the paranormal, a fear like no fear a person can explain takes over. It's embarrassing, it's not logical or reasonable to me, but I immediately get goosebumps and a cold shiver of dread up my spine. Since my earliest memories, I have experienced darkness. Until a very young teenage time, I had dreams of drowning in oily darkness, of war, of burning cities and people dying. I had dreams of shadows in the forests, demons were luring me. My parents had a challenging time because they would find me out of bed hiding in a different room crying on the floor while asleep. My first very confusing experience was when I was maybe 7 and the older kids took me to a basement where they tried a ghost invocation. We used a glass tied to a string. I only remember that they asked some questions, and the glass exploded. We ran in fear. Months later I remember waking up at probably 2 a.m., and I felt frozen in bed. I had my cover over my head and I saw 2 ghastly figures just walk through my bedroom. I was too scared to move, but eventually, when I peeked out, it was morning and sunny outside. My dad has friends who were into occult stuff, and he used to take me there, an 8-year-old. Telling them how incredibly smart for my age I am, probably too smart. I hadn't had any experiences except dreams until I was a teenager and I wanted to hike in the forests around my town. It never happened when I was with someone. When I'm alone, especially on a hike back there in the forests in Poland, I always felt something looking at me. The darkness between the trees was darker suddenly. If you went into the forest, all sounds would vanish. One day I remember I got brave enough, I always try to shrug that fear off, and I ventured into the ancient forest, and it was so wonderful, almost magical, but then I found myself in a dark part of the woods. I saw a random, lonely staircase in the distance and then found a clearing, and there was a very big, old, dead oak tree, and everything around it was quiet. The ground was dead, drained of nutrients. I remember I stopped going out on hikes alone. When I was 17, one of my friends, who was so deeply into history and World War II, wanted me to go with him on a forest hunt with a metal detector. There was a place a fairly long hike away from our town where, at the beginning of the century, there was a lake and a German restaurant. All of this area was once German before the war. There was a prison camp and ruins of an artificial petrol plant built by the Nazis, all in ruin, cordoned off due to possible mines or unexploded air bombs. I've been to that German restaurant spot many times before with school, my dad, and on group hikes. That day was different. My friend found some lovely old china plates, coins, and things, but I remember I couldn't settle. I felt all the time we should hurry. I still remember it was such an old feeling. I remember I finally convinced my friend to just pack away and go, and as he was almost done, we both heard a very low, bass-like rumbling, like a heavy machine or drums or both. But it couldn't be any truck because the nearest road was almost 2 miles away. I remember it was getting louder, and we both panicked and ran. We literally ran. We got back the same way, and we saw a few trees that broke and collapsed. There was no wind, and we both asked each other, how did that happen? Because those trees were okay before. Eventually we were out of the forest and sprinted to the nearest village. Suddenly we felt safe, but the first thing we saw was a herd of goats. And a large goat with the most diabolical horns, exactly the ones you see on those weird satanic books. I remember we fully jogged home, 8 miles, not talking. We never talked about it after. From that moment I tried very hard not to believe in anything paranormal. But I always had those chills come back, those moments of absolute anguish and fear when I was alone. Maybe that's why I moved to the UK. Here nothing happened for a long time until recently, when I was just at the end of a very toxic relationship, and at night, even with my partner, I had a feeling something was not okay. Maybe because although I was in a relationship, I was alone and lonely. In the last year of the relationship, I had things happen that varied from being uncomfortable to downright scary. During COVID I rescued a dog, and she is literally the light of my life, always around, and I feel safer with her. But, where I lived back then, things happened in a very open, small park near my house. When my dog was younger, she wasn't very good at holding her pee throughout the night, so I would take her to that park, literally 100 meters away from home, after 8 or 9 p.m. for a quick one. There was a lamppost at the far end you can see clearly when you enter the park. 3 times out of nowhere a hooded man, I think, appeared standing under it looking directly at me for the entire time I was with my dog. And immediately when I saw him, it was the same fear crawling up my spine. The last thing happened 3 weeks before I moved out. My ex moved out early, it was early January 2022. I took my dog out at around 9:30, and for obvious reasons I avoided the park and took her up a normal pathway nicely lit by streetlights and houses. However, everything felt different because of the thick fog outside. It reflected all the lights, giving everything a red hue. Everything was dead quiet. No cars, no people, and there were always some people out and about. No sounds from the houses. What I remember that stayed in my mind is how it all felt like a padded room. But I walked up the street with my dog, and before we even got to the end near the houses, there was this horrible screech, like something was being ripped apart while still being alive, and it lasted for a good 30 seconds. My dog cowered like mad, and she almost ripped my shoulder out because she ran home. And my dog doesn't mind fireworks and loud noises, but she was absolutely petrified, and so was I, and even after getting inside the house, nothing felt okay for a long while. I stayed up that night for a long time until I was too exhausted to be awake. I have not really told those things to anyone in the fear of being judged as crazy or ridiculous. But am I losing my mind, or are those thoughts simply a product of my imagination? If yes, why do I get so scared to the point of crying just remembering them? I'm a grown-ass man, I'm not afraid of the dark and night. But I am afraid of the darkness or the feeling of darkness, if that makes sense. A few months ago, my girlfriend and I were at my place at around 1 a.m. getting ready to go to sleep. We live alone in the house, and no one else is able to enter it. That night we were just sitting on my bed half nude and casually chatting, top floor of the house. That's when I heard footsteps on the wooden steps on the bottom floor. I've been living in that house my whole life and can always tell exactly where in the house someone is just based on the sound of the footsteps. I can also tell how heavy the person is and who it is if it's someone I know. At that point adrenaline rushed through my body, but I just sat there still and listened. After a short pause, which is normal when moving from the first staircase to the second, I heard the footsteps again, now louder, coming toward us. There were no animals in the house, and those were definitely human steps. My girlfriend was still talking at this point, so I signaled her to stop. At that point, the steps moved from the second staircase to the final staircase, which led to our room. We were both in shock when we heard that sound. We went completely silent and just listened. At that moment, the footsteps stopped halfway up the stairs, as if the person had noticed our silence and frozen in place. Everything was completely silent for a few seconds. Then the person started to slowly back down the third staircase as quietly as he could. The only problem is that on those wooden stairs, if you try to walk slowly, you end up, for some reason, being even louder than normal. The same happens with wooden doors. After a few minutes we decided to search the full house. I searched every single room in the house from top to bottom, every closet, and every place where someone could hide. I checked every window and every door. Everything was locked, and there was no sign that anyone was in the house. Nothing was stolen. To this day I have no idea what happened that night, but I know for a fact that those footsteps were human, and it was not a member of my family. I live in a 2 BHK, 2-bedroom, a hall, and a kitchen, apartment in a group of apartment buildings arranged in a rectangle with all buildings connected to each other by a common terrace. Our apartment is on the 5th floor, top floor, of one of the buildings. Both the bedrooms have a balcony attached to them, separated by a door. Balconies of all apartments face inside the rectangle formed by the buildings. It remains surprisingly quiet even though the buildings are in a pretty busy part of the city. Both balconies have clotheslines running on their outer sides. We keep a small bucket full of clothespins/clips. We keep this bucket on one of the balconies. It is usually left on the one where we last dried some clothes. We have installed wire nets in both balconies to stop pigeons from entering, as there are many pigeons in the area. They usually destroy plants and sometimes hurt themselves with stuff lying around in balconies. Note that after installing those nets, we never had an incident of a pigeon entering the balcony again, as those nets were tightly fitted with no gaps large enough for any pigeon to enter. Until that day. I live with my parents. My mom and I were the only people in our apartment. Dad leaves for work early in the morning. My mom was doing daily chores. I was doing some freelance coding work at the time, so I had my laptop on the study table in my room, and I was working on it, on a client's project. The bucket of pegs/clips was in the balcony attached to my room. I knew this because I saw it earlier in the morning when I went to the balcony. Early in the morning, Mom had hung some clothes to dry on my balcony, so the bucket had some pegs left in it. Sometime before noon I suddenly started hearing the sound of clothes pegs being dropped on the floor one by one in the balcony in a weirdly constant tempo. At first I thought that it was my mom taking dried clothes off the clothesline. She had the habit of just throwing the pegs on the floor instead of aiming for the bucket when in a hurry. But when she came to my room after she heard the sounds as well, I realized it was something else. Maybe a pigeon might have managed to get in through the net. So we both headed towards the balcony door, and as soon as we turned the doorknob, the sound stopped. We very much expected to see a pigeon flapping around trying to find the gap again. But as we opened the door, we saw there was nothing on the balcony, just pegs scattered on the floor and a few left inside the bucket, no pigeon or anything else, not even the sound of a pigeon flapping and flying away, just complete silence. My mom said it must be a pigeon, but honestly I don't know if it was. Firstly, there is no way a pigeon can get past the nets. Also, the level at which the pegs were in the bucket was very low. It would be very hard for a pigeon to reach that deep in the bucket while sitting on the edge, and if it was inside the bucket, it would be impossible for it to fly away silently without us noticing in the time it did. It should have made at least some noise from flapping its wings or from its paws against the plastic bucket and pegs. If we consider that it was indeed a pigeon, then from the moment we installed the nets on the balconies till now, that was the only time a pigeon managed to get past the net, and also managed to leave without us seeing it. I don't think it has anything to do with the paranormal, as that was the only weird thing to ever happen to us, but at the same time I don't have any way to explain it. I bought an old frame from Goodwill, and a year later, I still can't explain the events that followed. I'll say this to start off, I am an avid Goodwill shopper, Half the furniture in my room and my closet are from Goodwill. That said, nothing like this had ever happened to me before, and in the years that it's been since this happened, I've had no experiences. I was shopping casually one day when I came across something I thought was cool, a framed pressed flower on an old-looking piece of paper, with faded, elegant handwriting below it spelling out the scientific name for the flower. The picture frame looked like it had been painted over with purple nail polish and was much, much larger than the paper, in a way that was eye drawing but kind of off-center. I would have put it back down, except the flowers looked like forget-me-nots, which are my all-time favorite flowers. So I spent the $3 on that, as well as $3 on a smaller, more modern-style picture frame. My original goal was to put the flower and paper into the other frame and hang it up, but as soon as I arrived home, it became apparent that wasn't going to happen. The brown paper on the back of the purple frame was ripped already, and so when I finished ripping it off, I realized the picture frame was not only stapled shut but nailed. Yeah, I guess I could have spent the extra 45 minutes digging out all the nails and staples, but I didn't. I'm lazy. I just hung it up the way it was. For 2 straight weeks, every single night, that picture frame would fall off the wall. It didn't matter how I hung it up. Stick-on hook. Thumbtacks. Actual hooks. Even nails. It would be on my floor by the morning, occasionally waking me from my sleep when it fell. Some of the times when I woke up, I would hear rustling in the walls. It seemed as though an animal was roaming within the walls. I would get up and put my ear to the wall, trying to follow the sound so I could tell my dad where to look in the morning. My dad never found anything, but I was so sure something was moving in there, he called a professional pest guy. The pest guy didn't find any droppings or signs of life, but he agreed to leave a couple of traps in the attic. Before I explain this next part, let me lay out my room for you guys. It was a pretty big room, and considering I only had a twin bed pressed against the wall farthest from the door, despite being 5 feet 10 inches. Lol, the room seemed even bigger. The window was directly over my bed, and I like to keep my blinds open because I like natural light and looking at the moon when I sleep. There's also a sister bathroom attached to another identical room on the same wall as the entrance. If you go deeper into the bathroom, where the toilet is, there's a door to the attic. I only went in there when I had to because there were little tunnels and pockets of darkness that led into the walls of the house. It creeped me out. That's where the pest guy set the traps, and yet, I would check them every morning and find nothing. It was even more frustrating when the noises started happening earlier in the day or at twilight, increasing in frequency. And there was this horrible stench I cannot explain that seemed to be coming from the walls now too. And to be honest, about 11 days in, I adjusted and grew nose blind to it, and it only bothered me a little. I only remember how bad it was when someone else entered my room, because they would recoil or comment on it, and they typically didn't stay for long. Around the 2-week period mark, I realized I was dealing with raccoons in my wall. This time, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my door in the middle of the night. I yelled out to just give me 1 second and put on some pants, and the almost panic-sounding banging stopped. I opened my bedroom door too. No one. And despite being a scaredy cat through and through, I was so sure it was someone in my family that I checked the whole house, turned on every light, and woke up my dad and sister, who were apparently sleeping soundly, to ask what was wrong. Then I double-checked the locks on the doors, grabbed a knife, scaredy cat, okay? And went back to my room cautiously. Something about even stepping into that room made the hairs on the back of my neck stand and triggered my fight or flight, so try as I did, I could not fall back asleep. I sat stock still, listening for anything. I finally allowed myself to lie back and get comfortable. Not 10 minutes later, I heard it, a fainter knocking. It wasn't coming from my door, though. No. It was coming from my walls. I did not stay in there long enough to investigate after that realization. Indeed, I swiftly exited that room. I went and slept with my little sister in her room. She was freaked out already from my shaking her awake and didn't mind me sleeping in there anyway. The following day before school, I had to go back in there to change. It smelled worse than I remembered, maybe because I hadn't slept in there. I ignored the smell. I ignored the rustling. I spent about 3 minutes getting ready and then booked it. By the time I got back from school, I wasn't just scared. I was angry. If that was a spirit, as I thought, it had no right to act like it owned my room. It couldn't hurt me if I wasn't afraid. Probably. So as soon as I got home, I went straight to my room. I cleaned up for a bit, I rehung my flower, and then I turned off the light, and I sat on my bed. Waiting. I waited until it started for about an hour until something made me sit up. I couldn't tell you exactly what. The temperature did not drop, nor did the light diminish. It was only just reaching dusk, and my window still illuminated my room completely, and I had fairy lights hanging over a desk in the corner. But it felt darker, if that makes sense? The air felt heavy. I sat up and strained my ears until I heard a faint knock. First on one wall, then a second one closer to me, and then one farther away by my desk. So I did the most stereotypical thing you can do and was like, "Hello?" Nothing. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Even the knocking stopped. And then I did something I regret a little, because it confirmed my theory that it wasn't an animal. I said, "If someone's there, turn off my lights." I pointed to the fairy lights but didn't see anything happen at first. Then, just long enough to make me roll my eyes at myself, they turned off. I told the spirit to leave, that this was my room and they weren't welcome there. It actually made me feel better. It made the air lighter. I went downstairs and ate dinner. When I came back to go to bed, the picture frame was on the ground. This time, the fall had caused significant damage to both the glass and the frame. I cleaned up the glass, propped the thing by my wall, and chilled in there until I didn't feel afraid anymore. Eventually I went to bed. That night was the first and last time I have ever experienced sleep paralysis. I woke up in the dark, sleeping on my stomach. My face at an angle, facing the bathroom door and my desk. I couldn't see the door to my room or the wall where I hung the picture. I wasn't panicked at first. I knew I couldn't move, but I was relieved I had escaped my dream, though I can't remember what it had been now. And then I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't. I could feel the presence, a distinctly male presence, and I could feel the darkness in the room intensify as the shadows cast from the window moved on my wall as he approached me. I stared at the bathroom door, knowing that if I could just move my fingers or my toes and jumpstart my limbs into action, I could escape. But I couldn't. The bed pressed in on both sides of my feet, like someone had put their hands on either side of my feet. Then, bit by bit, I felt those invisible hands crawl farther and farther upward and could feel warm breath on my calves while I lay frozen in terror. I saw the bed move with my own eyes right by my tilted head. It compressed like someone was putting pressure on it, but there was nothing there. The warm breath was expelled straight onto my neck. It touched my hip, its hand bigger than the span of my back, bigger than any hand I've ever seen. It wasn't sexual or anything. It was possessive. I couldn't see the thing, but I could feel it. I could feel its intent. It didn't feel aggressive or violent, but it felt evil. Malicious. And most of all, it felt smug. I think if I had seen its face, it would have been smiling. And that scared me so much that finally I jerked away from its hold, stumbled to the bathroom, to the next bedroom, literally unable to stop screaming until I was down the stairs. My dad and both my sisters rushed towards me, freaking out, and I immediately burst into tears. I told them what happened when I finally calmed down enough. My oldest sister was quick to say it was just a dream, a scientifically explainable occurrence, but my dad and my little sister were a little more willing to believe it was a ghost. We'd grown up hearing scary stories about my dad's haunted house, and we, to this day, are all believers. I threw away the picture a week later, a solid week of sleeping on the couch. I had thought long and hard about when it started, but it didn't take much deduction to conclude whatever spirit was haunting me was attached to that frame. The sticky, slimy red substance coated the entire inside of the frame as I threw it away. And it smelled horrible, just like my room had. It was impossible to wash the stuff off too. It took me a good 10 minutes and a lot of wasted water. Some other creepy stuff happened, even after I moved out, but it wasn't nearly that bad. And as much as I hate to be that person, as soon as I got interested in Quakerism and became more religious, all of those problems stopped entirely. What I do think is interesting is why I made this post. I moved out of my dad's house with a friend and had to move back in at the start of COVID. About 4 months into it, I became more religious, and it was like a weight was lifted off my chest. At the same time, 3 things happened that I thought were worth noting, even though they didn't scare me. The last one I found out today. 1. My dad and his employee turned my old bedroom into an office when I moved out. In the same week that I started feeling more like myself, Ben, let's call the employee Ben, came down the stairs looking extremely uncomfortable with a stack of papers in his hand. It was a stack of printed paper that had apparently come out of the printer. It was a slideshow my little sister had made for school back in 9th grade. It was printing out the pages in a loop, over and over again. Ben had turned off the printer multiple times, but it just kept turning back on and printing the pages out. Apparently it had been doing that all week, he said. And it was starting to scare him. But the funny thing is, that printer has been broken for almost a year. We could never get it to work or even turn on, and we even had another printer at that point. My dad just never got around to throwing it away. It was also late summer by that point, and my sister was just about to enter 10th grade. 2. Not 5 minutes after he said that, we hear a loud crash and 2 screams from upstairs. While my sister and her friend were in the bathroom, somehow her 50-pound giant mirror had crashed onto the floor and shattered into a million pieces. It was leaning against the wall, and it would take a lot of strength to knock it over. It's not something that happens on accident. Both Ben and the friend left pretty quickly after that, freaked out, though Ben did a better job of concealing it. 3. My dad has had sleep paralysis too. It happened only once. He just told me about it. And as he told me, I got this unsettling feeling. It was within a 2-week period of the mirror incident. So what if I never really got rid of the spirit? What if it had followed me, lost its grip on me, and was looking for a new host? My sister is experiencing the deepest depression she has ever faced in her life, similar to what I experienced when I moved out. I felt like I was going crazy. It's a stretch, but it's worth sharing. If you've listened to it until the end, thanks, let me know your thoughts. When I was younger, probably about 4 or 5 years old, I had a really odd experience that stuck with me. One night, for whatever reason, I woke up and came out to the living room to watch TV with my mom because I couldn't fall back asleep. The couch was against the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. If you sat on the couch and looked to your left, you could see all the way down the hall that led to the bathroom and bedrooms. So my mom lets me watch TV with her for a while, and after maybe 15 minutes, she gets up to go outside and smoke. As I'm sitting on the couch just watching TV, something catches my attention in the corner of my eye. I look down the hallway, which is pitch black. The only light source is coming from the living room. Out of the darkness of the hall walk 2 cats. One is totally black, and another is pure white. They have the same slender bodies and walk in unison. I got my mom because our tabby cat was outside. We didn't have a white or a black cat, so I thought maybe a neighbor's cat snuck in somehow. I went to tell my mom, and she was really surprised because no cat got past her when she opened the door to go smoke, and she had been in the living room for most of the evening and figured she would have seen something if the cat snuck in. She put out her cigarette and came in to look for them. But they were nowhere to be seen. We looked all over, but they weren't there. There was no sign of them the next day or any day after that. My mom sort of dismissed it and sent me off to bed again. A few months ago I was thinking about this experience and asked my mom if she remembered. I wasn't sure whether my memory had distorted the information or if I was simply recalling a dream as if it were real. But she did remember it, just as I do. She grew up in that house, and over the years, her family had various animals. I asked if at any time they owned a black or white cat, but she said no. I don't know what I saw. I don't think the cats were actual physical cats. They seemed to have this air about them. Like they were composed. Like they wanted me to see them, as if it was their purpose. I hope I don't sound too weird. Maybe there is a totally logical explanation. I'd like to think that I am a fairly logical person, but I just can't think of a normal reason for seeing them. What do you guys think? Have you had a similar experience? Do you have any information as to what I might have seen or why? When I was a kid, I was super into fairies and mystical shit like that. I lived near a small woods and long field with a stream going through branches off into about 4 different directions, and I don't know what I was doing, but I suddenly stopped and looked up, and not too far away from me, I saw this thing. It was small, probably about 2 inches, and it was floating. It was such a weird shape. It was like a plumb bob, like this, but the neck was shorter and it had a head, which was kind of shaped like a small tulip, but it didn't have a face, or eyes, or any sort of details really, not that I could see at least. And it had what I assume were wings, but they didn't flap up and down, or back and forth, they spun around the neck, like helicopter blades. But it didn't just float, it darted. Up, diagonal, pause, left, pause, right. And it wasn't a windy day, there was no gust of wind, and even if there were, it didn't move like something manipulated by wind. It's hard to explain. If it wasn't for the way it moved, and the shape of it, I would think it was one of these falling, or maybe even a dragonfly, but it was so clear to me, at the time, I was certain it was neither of those things. I always try to remember what color it was, but I just can't, but the shape I perfectly recall because I drew it over and over again for months after I saw it. I watched it for a long moment. I was amazed. There was no doubt in my mind that I was witnessing a fairy. A real-life fairy. It made sense to me that they wouldn't look like the fairies in books when they are born as shrimp things. Obviously they'd be more insect-like. I looked away for a second to see if my mum and sister were still in view, and called them, shouting, "Mum! Mum! I found a fairy." But when I looked back, it was gone. My mum came over thinking I meant the fairies, shrimp things, but I was like, no, I mean a real fairy. She was like, "Oh wow, really? You know the way adults do when they're trying to humor a child, but the child doesn't pick up on it? Yeah. I didn't pick up on it, so I made a fool of my little self trying to explain it to her. She obviously thought I was making it up, playing pretend or something, but although I was very imaginative as a kid, I never did anything like that. I never claimed anything I was pretending was real, and before this, I'd never actually seen anything, even imaginary. Now I wonder if it was just my child brain having a fanny attack and going a bit wonky, hallucinating, but I've never hallucinated before in my life, so why would I have hallucinated for that one moment? And like I said, maybe I just saw one thing and it looked like something else, but although I only watched it for a moment, it was still long enough to get a clear view of it. The shape of it was so odd and specific, it just stood out to me. It was one of those moments where everything else just seemed still. Anyways. These days I don't believe in fairies. But this is a memory I have, and belief, or lack of, doesn't change what I saw, so while it might not have been a fairy, it definitely was something very odd. Please explain this weird experience at 8 years old. When I was a little boy of around 8 years old, now I'm 31, my mom took me to a kids' pool party. One of her friends had twin girls around the same age, and it was their birthday that day. My memories of that day aren't abundant, I don't remember every detail of what happened. However, the things I do recall aren't blurry at all, the little moments I remember are crystal clear. We arrived at the pool where the twins and other children were, and I recall that my mother began conversing with the other mothers at the party while I played in the pool with those same children. There were many things at the party, like inflatable castles for jumping, tables full of food and drinks, and a little park with slides and such that I just couldn't keep my eyes off of. It was like that park had something special, though I didn't know what. I couldn't stop looking at it, I was drawn to it. Some kids from the party were playing there, and it was meant for the party to use, as if it were part of the pool area, though it wasn't very close, probably about 60 feet, 20 meters, away or so. Kids were constantly running back and forth to it, but then again, we were all just kids having fun. I remember swimming a little more, and then I couldn't help it anymore. I had been kind of resisting, but I had to go to the park. I needed to know what it was that made the park so interesting to me, so I just headed there, as if I had a call for it. When I got to the park, there were these slides, and without much thought, I just climbed and went down the biggest slide there was. It wasn't too tall, but for an 8-year-old kid, it was fun, you know? After I slid down, I unexpectedly remained still and didn't move. I stayed there, sitting at the end of the slide. Why? I don't know. After about 30 seconds or so, I looked up, and there was this really big, fat kid getting ready to slide down, not caring at all if I was there or not. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't too skinny myself. I ate well and all, had a tummy and everything, but this kid was really fat, like very obese, you could say. The thought of him sliding down and hitting my back was scary, and yet, for some reason, I still didn't move. And off he went, sliding down at top speed, and I just stayed there, waiting for him to hit me. I still remember all of that, and I can't think of a reason why I didn't move, really. But anyway, he hit my back, and as soon as he did, I remember blacking out. Not the kind of blackout where you faint from being hit, but more like everything went black after that. I couldn't see a thing. And then, all of a sudden, in that blackness, I opened my eyes, and I was in my room, in my bed, in my usual sleeping position. But I couldn't move at all. I was only able to move my eyes. I remember hearing things happening outside my bedroom and tried to speak, but I couldn't open my mouth or vocalize my thoughts. I could only move my eyes a little. I was having sleep paralysis, but I didn't know it at the time. I only learned about sleep paralysis and what it was after I turned 14, so back then, I didn't think too much of it. I just thought I had a weird dream and went back to sleep, lol. Anyways, after sleeping a bit more, I woke up like normal, but what happened was too weird to just let go. Was it all a dream, or did it actually happen? To me, it felt way too real, so I remember starting to ask my mom questions about the fat kid who hit me on the slide. She was like, "What fat kid?" And I said, "From the party." She replied, "What party?" And I said, "From the pool." Then she asked, "What pool?" At that point, I was used to my mom not listening too closely to me or paying deep attention to the things I said. I remember she would dismiss a lot of my ideas rapidly because I was just a kid, and I really let my imagination run wild a lot of the time. I would say things that adults usually considered weird or just a product of a kid's imagination. So, I let my imagination loose there and thought to myself that what happened at the pool and all that had actually happened a year ago, and when I was hit on the slides, I fell into some kind of coma for a year. I believed I had just woken up there, in my bed, a year later. I know, I told you my imagination was wild when I was a kid. So there I was, 8-year-old me thinking I was actually 9 years old. I remember that for 3 whole days, I would tell everyone that I was 9. Why 3 days? I'll get to that in a bit. But I remember very vividly that my mom would get really embarrassed because we'd meet someone on the street, and they'd ask about me or my age. My mom would say, "He's 8, and I would correct her, saying, "Mom, I'm 9. I recall her being embarrassed and smirking when I said it. Thinking about it now is actually a bit funny to me. 3 days went by, and I was still convinced I was 9, even though my mom and other family members kept telling me I was 8. I really thought they were dumb because they didn't seem to realize that I had lived through a whole year in a coma, lol. And on that 3rd day, my mom says, "Hey, we're going to the pool today, so get ready." I didn't think too much of it and went to grab my usual swimming gear, got ready, and off we went. When we arrived at the place, I got out of the car and had this odd feeling that I remembered the place, but still, nothing seemed too strange. As we walked further and started seeing the pool, the same one from the story, I began noticing the inflatable castles and tables, and that's when things started feeling really odd to me. But I was there, just going with the flow. Then it happened. My mom went to greet the twins' mother, and the exact same scene from my dream, or not dream, or whatever that weird experience was, started unfolding. I kid you not, the exact same scene. My mom said the same words, introducing me to the twins' mom, then introducing me to the twins. The same party was going on, the same things, the same people, the same everything. It was like I was experiencing the same thing for a second time. The tables were the same, the inflatable castle, even the kids doing the same things. And the park, let's not forget about it. It was right there in the same spot, and I just couldn't keep my eyes off it. Just writing this down tears me up because it's such a weird, vivid thing in my mind. And there I was, enjoying the party again? The same things were happening, but it wasn't just a little similar, no, the exact same things were happening. The twin girls said the same things to me, some other kids were doing the exact same things, jumping into the pool the same way, and there was the park that I couldn't stop looking at. It was happening again. I was scared of the park at that point, but for some weird reason, I couldn't get it out of my sight or my mind. Deep down, I didn't want to go there, but when the time came, I just stood up, just like before, and walked to the park the same way, at the same speed. When I got there, I looked at the park the same way I did before, and then I climbed up the biggest slide, just like before, and slid down. When I was down there, I waited patiently, and after about 30 seconds or so, I looked up, and there he was, the fat kid, just carelessly getting ready to slide down and ram me over. Still, to this day, I don't know why, if I knew he was going to slide down, I didn't just move. I really don't. But I stood there, and the fat kid just launched himself down, and off he came. Then, boom, he hit my back with his feet and all his weight. Only this time, there was no blackout. I just started feeling the pain in my back, and I began crying, like any kid would when being hit. I bolted off, crying to my mom to tell her what happened. I remember she was paying more attention to her conversation with her friend than to the fact that I was crying, which was a bit unusual for her. She tried to calm me down, and after the pain wore off, I went back to the pool to relax and just play it cool. I remember that I started thinking about what just happened, and right then and there, I knew I wasn't 9 years old, that's for sure, lol. So I shrugged those ideas off. I started thinking to myself that I had indeed let my imagination run far too wild. In my mind, I thought that when the fat kid hit me, I would black out again, but this time, I would somehow be able to experience my 1-year coma, like actually knowing what I went through instead of just waking up a year later. Just kids reasoning, you know? But since it didn't happen, I realized it was just me with a wild imagination. And so, days passed by, and I started forgetting about it. Then months, and then years. I basically stopped talking about it at all, which brings me to today. I'm now married, have been married for 3 years, and my wife and I, over the last couple of months, have been talking a lot about our past, sharing stories and whatnot. This story came up, and I told her what I experienced. She was very interested in it and said there was more to it than I cared to acknowledge. She's convinced there's something to analyze and discover from the whole thing, so she told me to share it on here and see if someone knows something or has experienced something similar, maybe share the story if that is the case. Any information you might have that would lead us to any answer would be great. I might add that since I stopped talking about this for more than half of my life, I forgot whether my dream, or not dream, and the sleep paralysis happened before or after the real pool birthday party. It was all really mixed up in my head. The story was initially about the sleep paralysis that I didn't know was sleep paralysis, So my wife told me to call my mom and ask her questions about those times to see if we could pick up on something. So, I called my mom and asked her about it. She didn't remember much about me from those times, apart from the fact that I did say weird things from time to time, which she just thought was my imagination. She also remembered that I used to say I was 9 when I was actually 8 years old. She said that I always wanted to be older than I really was, and that was something that stood out about my personality. Then I asked her, "But do you remember your friend who had twin daughters around my age?" She said, "Yeah," and I asked, "Do you remember a birthday party at a pool?" She said, "Yeah, I remember that day. What about it?" I then asked, "Do you remember anything weird or that stood out about me that day?" She responded, "The only thing I remember that weirded me out was that I introduced you to my friend and the twins for the first time in your life. I knew you didn't know them at all, but when I introduced you to the twins, you said to me, 'Yeah, Mom, I already met them before. They're my friends.'" Got goosebumps just writing that final part. So, that confirmed for me and my wife that I, in fact, did experience the dream before the real life event. Could there be a connection between that and the sleep paralysis? I don't know, but please do share any insight you might have, as now I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of this.